Chapter 1548. They knew that rushing forward would most likely result in death, but they had no other choice. General Mater obviously wanted to use them to consume the ammunition of the 5-star army. The only thing they could do was to be a somewhat useful live target. Knowing that they would die, most of the Hindustanis simply threw away the weapons in their hands. To them, in the face of firearms, there was no difference whether they had weapons in their hands or not. Since that was the case, they might as well die in a relaxed manner. A total of 40,000 people walked forward step by step in a densely packed formation. Some soldiers even held hands with each other. It seemed that only by doing so would they not be so lonely on the road to the underworld after death. Even though the sky had already darkened, there were still people moving about in the vast and mighty army of 40,000 people. These were all human lives. Even though they were of a different race, many of the Cold Front warriors still couldn't bear to see this happen. Even Beta Persei and the others who were standing in the middle of the army seemed to have the same thought. Many of them even deliberately looked at Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon. Perhaps they wanted their master to be merciful to their opponents. How could Yang Chendong not feel the gazes of these people intentionally or unintentionally looking at him? But his heart was like a boulder and did not waver in the slightest. He would never forget how the Hindustanis in the future rebelled against China. When you were needed, you could say anything. When you were not needed, you could be as cruel as possible. Looting, burning, and killing were all kinds of evil, but their country did not care. Instead, they allowed such things to happen. Because of this, many outstanding Chinese people suffered losses in this matter, and even lost their lives because of it. Since there was a chance now, of course, he would not let these people live, let alone let history repeat itself. Give the order. Unless you kneel down and surrender, you are the enemy. You know how to treat the enemy. After Yang Chendong said this, no one dared to say anything else. Some smart ones had already run to the front to pass the order. In fact, there was no need to give any special orders. Since Yang Chendong did not give any new orders, they would just follow the same old routine. Therefore, before the messenger could cross the river and reach the front line, the 5-star army had already opened fire. The vanguard of the 40,000 Hindustanis was already within 300 paces, and under the full force of their firepower, wave after wave of Indian soldiers fell to the ground. After being shot, some of the Hindustanis even had a look of relief on their faces. Perhaps this way, they would no longer have any worries. The gunshots did not stop, and the casualties of the Hindustanis continued to increase. Under the heavy firepower of the Lengfeng soldiers, no one could get within 100 steps of them. Most of them were shot dead between 300 and 200 steps. This phenomenon continued until a quarter of an hour later, when the most elite cavalry of the 5-star army had already crossed the river. Then, without waiting for the formation to be completed, the two commanders, Tianhu and Suhi, commanded the cavalry to charge forward, one on the left and one on the right. The moment the cavalry charged, the Lengfeng soldiers stopped shooting. In just a short while, bullets had already fallen to the ground beneath their feet. Now that they no longer had to shoot, many of the soldiers began to massage their arms. It was obvious that shooting was a strenuous job, and it was very tiring to shoot for a long time. Charge. Those who drop their weapons and kneel down will live. Tens of thousands of the 5-star army's elite cavalry charged, and the battle cry rang out everywhere. They shouted in the Hindustani language that they had just learned. In fact, it was just a Hindustani language to force the enemy to surrender, and it was not difficult to learn. Just a moment ago, they were still facing firearms attacks, and suddenly, the enemy changed tactics. Many of the Hindustanis widened their eyes, and they did not know what to do. It was true that infantry was at a disadvantage against cavalry, but it was not to say that they did not have a chance. But when they wanted to fight back, they found that the weapons in their hands had been thrown to the ground at some point. At this time, how could it be so easy to find them in the dark? Run! Seeing that the Han cavalry was getting closer, many of the Hindustanis' faces changed. To them, they would rather be killed by a flintlock. At least they would die a quick death. However, if they were hit by a warhorse, it was very likely that they would not die immediately. Instead, they would have to suffer a lot. This was not what they wanted. The tens of thousands of Hindustanis were all panicking, and the originally orderly formation became very chaotic. Everyone turned around and ran. It was as if whoever was a step slower would suffer the pain of being trampled by 10,000 horses. In such a chaotic environment, how many people would seriously listen to the five-star army's slogans to surrender? Due to the cavalry's charge, the battlefield became even more chaotic. This greatly exceeded the expectations of Grand General Matu behind him. He did not deny that the infantry was sent to exhaust the five-star army's ammunition. He had seen the firearms that his king bought from the west, and he knew that it required a lot of gunpowder to fire. Once there was no gunpowder, the gun was no different from an ordinary stick. He hated the fact that the five-star army appeared and destroyed his artillery and firearms. Otherwise, he would not have to use manpower to exhaust bullets in exchange for a chance to win. However, who would have thought that the gunshots would stop? Just when he was thinking that the five-star army's gunpowder was about to run out, he suddenly saw the black shadow rushing back. Not only that, the ground under his feet began to tremble. What's going on? After Matu exclaimed, he instantly thought of a possibility. Then he said in shock, "Not good, the five-star army's cavalry has already crossed the river. They are charging. Come, archers, where are the archers? Prepare to counterattack." As he shouted, Matu's eyes revealed a hint of joy. Although the cavalry was not easy to deal with, it was still better than the untouchable firearms. Once the Han cavalry's momentum was restrained, perhaps his opportunity would come. For example, he could push the enemy back and then take the opportunity to lead his troops to charge. With the Han cavalry's cover, the five-star army's firearms would not be able to fire casually. This would create an opportunity for him to rush to the river. This sudden turn of events had indeed caught many of the Indian generals off guard. But after hearing the great general's shout, many people calmed down from their panic. Then many of the soldiers picked up the bows on their backs and prepared to counterattack. In the dark, there was a limit to the accuracy of a bow and arrow. Unless it was a godly archer, the arrow that was shot out would most likely fly off to who knows where. Fortunately, they had enough soldiers. When the rain of arrows fell, even Meng Yi would be able to deal a heavy blow to the five-star army's cavalry. It was a good idea, but they forgot one thing. That was, in front of the five-star army's cavalry, there were still tens of thousands of their own troops. Even though they had been suppressed by Lang Feng for 15 minutes, there were still more than 30,000 people. This was not a small force. Because they did not want to be trampled to death by the cavalry, their retreat not only made it difficult for the archers to shoot, but also caused them to charge back into their own camp, causing even more damage. It was not a bad idea, but it had already become a reality. Under the pursuit of the cavalry, under the heavy sound of iron hooves, the Hindustanis desperately ran back. Even when they reached their own camp, they did not have any intention of stopping. Perhaps they did not want to be trampled to death, or perhaps they wanted to return to their own camp to seek reinforcements. But no matter what, they still charged back, causing damage to Matu's defense and the archers' counterattack. It's a success. Everyone, attack. Extend the cannons and bring out those mortars as well. With the help of the binoculars, Yang Chendong saw the Hindustanis frantically running back and his own cavalry chasing after them. Although he could only see a rough picture in the dark, with his many years of experience, he believed that it was a success. Soldiers were defeated like a landslide. This was the scene in front of him. Once the situation on the battlefield became irreversible, even if they wanted to, it would be impossible to reverse the situation. When Beta Persei heard that they were going to use the mortars, how could he remain calm? He immediately agreed, turned around, and rode away. Not long after, the rumbling sound of cannons could be heard. This was not the self-made field artillery of the five-star army's military factory, but the sound of a 100mm mortar. In comparison, it could hit a distance of more than 10 miles and could kill people. The shells landed behind the Hindustani army, causing great damage and completely disrupted Matu'er's previous arrangement. He always thought that a 6-mile bombardment was the limit of the 5-star army. He thought that the place where he was standing was very safe. But who would have thought that there would be such powerful cannons? Seeing that the rear of the army had also been hit by the cannons and was in chaos, he said with a sorrowful expression, "Retreat, retreat all the way back to Vidal City." The Hindustani army, who had been in a passive position, finally admitted defeat under the great power of the mortars and the 5-star army's trump card. Fortunately, Matu'er was decisive in his actions. Under his decisive command, 100,000 of the 300,000-strong army managed to escape back into the city. And this battle had basically crushed the Hindustani army's will to resist. The sky was finally bright. At this time, under Yang Chendong's command, the army basically joined the battle. But because the Hindustani army was already in a mess and had no strength to resist, most people were just capturing captives. The battlefield was big enough, there were enough enemies, there was a language barrier and very few people cooperated. The capture of captives actually took 2 days and 1 night. It was not until noon on the 3rd day after the battle began that the battlefield basically stopped. Yang Chendong looked at the report that had just been sent to him. In this battle, they had killed more than 70,000 enemies and captured nearly 130,000 enemies. He knew that the Hindustanis were about to be finished. Chapter 1549. In Bidar city, General Matu'er led the defeated army back to the city, and Nehru was shocked when he heard the news. That was 300,000 people, even 300,000 pigs couldn't be slaughtered so quickly, right? Although Matu'er had brought back 100,000 people, it still made Nehru very angry. He had hoped that the 300,000 men would hold off the 5-star army, and once the stalemate reached a certain point, he would look for an opportunity to counterattack. Now, he had lost 2/3 of his soldiers, and with the soldiers in the city, there were only 25 men left. How long could they hold off the 5-star army? Nehru was furious, and the consequences were severe. In front of all the generals and ministers, he ordered Matu'er to be executed. Matu'er didn't resist at all. He had fought the 5-star army twice in a row, and had lost twice. He no longer had the confidence to win against the Hans. Since that was the case, so be it. Death was release. After Nehru killed Mater, he personally took command. He wanted to bring the 250,000 soldiers in the city to fight a decisive battle with the 5-star army in Bidar city. This was also a national war. During this process, some people suggested that they should send people to negotiate with the 5-star army. At most, they would surrender to the other party and respect the other party as their suzerain. There were also people who suggested that they should continue to retreat. They could retreat to Gabaja city. If that didn't work, they could retreat to Bangalore. Speaking of which, India's territory was not small. However, these 2 points were rejected by Nehru in the end. Surrendering was impossible. He understood that in front of the 5-star army, there was only the possibility of annihilation. There was no such thing as peace in exchange for surrender. Since they were going to be annihilated no matter what, they might as well give it a try before they die. As for retreating, where would they retreat to the day after tomorrow? Doing so would only cause the morale of the army to drop, and they wouldn't have a chance to fight the final battle. To be able to become the king of Hindustan, Nehru wasn't a coward. On the contrary, he was someone with great ambition. He was determined to fight the 5-star army. He wanted to see how strong the other party was. For this, the first thing Nehru did was to boost the morale of the army. He announced the wealth he had brought from the capital to the public and explained how much money and benefits one could get from killing an enemy on the battlefield. This kind of open and transparent reward system had indeed boosted morale and stirred up the hearts of the people. In just 2 days, the 250,000 Indian soldiers in the city seemed to have been reborn, and some of them even showed signs of longing for war. On the 5th day, Yang Chendong led the main force of the army and appeared outside Vidal city. When he learned that King Nehru did not escape, but was prepared to fight to the death with him here, he was naturally very happy. He liked to fight, because it simplified complicated matters, it could buy him more time. And in order to fully respect this opponent, he was determined to show his ability, such as using the Air Force. He didn't try to understand the situation in the city. Although there were spies from the intelligence department in the city, they weren't equipped with radios and couldn't spread any news. And even without the support of intelligence, Yang Qindong could imagine that since Nehru didn't intend to leave, he must have made ample preparations and was waiting for Yang Qindong to attack the city. Since that was the case, let's see who's more powerful. On the first day outside the city, the Air Force couldn't take off due to the heavy rain. Yang Qindong endured for an entire day, which further boosted the morale of King Nehru. He shouted arrogantly that the 5-star army wasn't invincible, and they were probably afraid of his army. This boosted the morale of the 250,000 soldiers in the city by a large margin. In such a situation, without the support of advanced weapons, it was really impossible for the 200,000 soldiers of the 5-star army to take down Pidal City. In ancient times, the existence of a strong city would often deter the enemy. Sometimes, in order to take over a city, it was possible for the enemy to surround it for a few months, half a year, or even longer. That was also why the wise monarchs in ancient times had the desire to expand their territory, but were often unable to do so. But in Yang Qindong's eyes, all of that was nothing. The reason why he was able to lead his army to conquer such a large territory in just over a decade was because of the advantage brought by the large warehouse. He had advanced weapons that were far superior to those in this world, which was the greatest weapon that made him invincible and invincible. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't want to kill indiscriminately and that he needed to leave a lot of people behind to build his homeland, he could have formed an Air Force helicopter brigade, tank brigade, and war chariot brigade. Just think about it, if he took out those things, who in the world would be a match for him? This was especially true for those large caliber cannons that could shoot up to tens of kilometers, hundreds of kilometers, or even more. If he really let them unleash their might, the enemy would often be destroyed before they even knew what they looked like. Yang Qindong did not do that. What he needed was to conquer, not destroy. At the same time, he also needed a powerful army for his use, not an army that only knew how to use the advantage of weapons to fight weak enemies. If that was really the case, what kind of combat power would this army have when he was no longer around? He did not use his strongest ability because he did not need to. Even if he did not use his strongest weapon, he could still conquer one country after another in a very short time, expand his territory, and instill the idea of Han supremacy in the world. Now that he had come to India, it was only natural that he wanted to occupy this place. From then on, India would perish, and this country and race would no longer exist in the world. From then on, there would no longer be any incidents of Indians rebelling against China. Before he conquered this place, he did not mind teaching them a lesson, making them remember him forever, so that they would tremble at the thought of the 5-star army, and lose their will to resist. When he thought of doing that, he had to deal them a heavy blow. Therefore, on the morning of the third day, when the sky cleared up and the sun hung high in the sky, the Air Force set off with an order. Over 100 hot air balloons soared into the air above Bidar city. At this time, on the city walls of Bidar, countless Indians were waiting in formation. Beside them, there were many temporary wooden huts. They were all made up of huge wooden sleepers, which were the preparations they had made to defend against the cannons. From the words of the 100,000 defeated soldiers, they knew that the cannons of the 5-star army were extremely powerful, and had a long range as well. Mater had lost in this aspect. Nehru came up with such a method after learning from the mistakes of his predecessors. Although it could not completely suppress the power of the cannons, at least when the cannons were fired, there would be a place to hide. Perhaps they could not avoid being injured or dying in battle, but it was better than nothing. When he thought that he had done all this, he would have the ability to compete with the 5-star army, or at least have the ability to fight a protracted war. But when he heard the exclamations of the soldiers, and saw the hot air balloons that had appeared above the city without him knowing, he was still shocked. What are these things? Nehru did not know, nor did he know what they were used for. But his intuition told him that these things must be very dangerous. After all, being able to fly in the sky was already a breakthrough in the thinking of many people. Because of the backward science, the ancients had always been in awe of the heavens. Before they could figure out whether the earth was round or square, the heavens were always in existence that they had to worship. But now, there were actually people who could fly in the sky. Just this statement alone made the eyes of many Hindustanis show fear. Although the stimulation of wealth did not cause any chaos, it was obvious that the morale of the army was greatly affected when they saw the hot air balloons floating in the sky. Although they did not know what these things floating in the sky were, they knew that they did not have these things, but the Han people did. As soon as the hot air balloons appeared, it attracted the attention of all the Hindustanis in the city. Not only were there 200,000 soldiers, but there were also more than 1 million civilians in the city. India was a large country with a large population at that time. As one of the largest cities in the country, Vidar city had long had more than 1 million civilians. This was also one of the reasons why Nehru was so confident. In his opinion, with so many civilians, as long as he did not suffer a crushing defeat, he could rise again at any time. Under the eyes of millions of people, the hot air balloons arrived above Vidar city. Then, a large number of wooden barrels filled with black oil fell from the sky like a fairy scattering flowers, falling toward Vidar city. Countless wooden barrels fell, but to the Hindustanis who did not know the power of the black oil, this did not make them feel anything. They only instinctively dodged. However, when the wooden barrels fell to the ground, a large amount of black oil poured out. Following that, many fire extinguishers fell from the sky and started a huge fire. That kind of scorching feeling and that kind of threatening fire caused many people to become alarmed and cry out loudly. Some of the kerosene fell on the city tower of Vidar city, and the fire immediately burst into flames. One after another, people shouted to put out the fire. The soldiers began to put out the fire with basins of water. This primitive method of putting out the fire naturally had no effect on the kerosene. Not only that, but the fire also became more vigorous in a short period of time because of the water. Many Hindustani soldiers were caught off guard and were burned by the fire, causing even more miserable screams. On the city tower, Nehru, who was protected by countless palace guards, stared at the scene in front of him with wide eyes, and his body trembled involuntarily. Chapter 1550. He knew that the 5-star army would have cannons to pave the way, and he was prepared to sacrifice some of his men. However, he believed that in the end, the siege still depended on people. As long as they could hold on until the 5-star army was blocked outside the city, it would be considered a victory. Under such a series of attacks, when both sides suffered casualties, the scales of victory would slowly tip towards him. After all, he was the king of India. If he was in trouble, the soldiers of other cities would not leave him in the lurch. Especially when they saw that he was in a stalemate with the 5-star army, the possibility of them sending reinforcements would greatly increase. When that time came, the 5-star army would not have any reinforcements. At that time, even if 2, 3, or even 5 people were sacrificed, the final victor would still be him. This was the reason why Nehru persisted until the end. He firmly believed that with the advantage of nearly 10 million people, he would definitely be able to drive the 5-star army out of the country. However, he never expected that the other party would start a fire, and it was the kind of fire that could not be extinguished at all. Perhaps the fire would not hurt many people, but the impact on the morale of the army was unimaginable. When all the soldiers lost their fighting spirit because of the fear of the fire, the 5-star army would charge at the right time. Who would be able to stop them? For this battle, he took out all his assets to reward everyone and raise the morale of the army. However, all of this was based on whether they could win and survive. And if they died in battle, what was the use of all the wealth? At this moment, Nehru finally felt fear. He did not know if the 5-star army had any other means that they had not used yet. Just a big fire had already left him at a loss. What would he do if there were other ways to attack? The fire continued to light up in the city and could not be extinguished. Anyone who came into contact with the flames would either die or be seriously injured without exception. It did not take long for the city to turn into a living hell. On the other hand, the 5-star army outside the city had no intention of attacking the city at all. On the contrary, they set up a formation to prevent the Hindustanis from launching a counterattack in desperation. After that, they began to cook. It didn't take long for the aroma of meat to drift into Vidal's city. If it was any other time, the aroma of the meat would definitely make the Hindustanis, who could not even fill their stomachs, swallow their saliva. However, at this moment, all of them were vomiting non-stop. There was no other reason other than the fact that many people in the city had already been burned to death and turned into roasted meat. The smell they emitted was actually not much different from the smell of meat. How could it not make people want to vomit? Young master, when do we attack? Beta Persei asked curiously as he watched the fire burning everywhere in the city. Don't worry. This Nehru clearly wants to fight us to the death. How can we let him have his way? Let's burn it for a few days first. Yang Chendong had a confident smile on his face. What he wanted was to exchange the greatest victory for the smallest price. He wanted to see how many more days these Hindustanis could last. Yang Chendong was neither in a hurry nor slow. He had no intention of attacking the city at all. Every day, he ordered the Air Force to drop black oil barrels into Vidal's city. The fire was put out again and again, and after 5 days of this, the city that had been bustling with life had turned into scorched land. Wails and cries could be heard everywhere. Not only did the fire burn many Hindustani soldiers and civilians to death, but it also ignited the piles of food that were originally stored in the city. The water source was also greatly damaged due to the fire. Seeing that it would not be long before the city fell into a situation of food and water shortage even if the 5-star army did not attack the city, Nehru's face turned pale. He finally experienced the feeling of helplessness in the face of the 5-star army. He finally understood why the alliance army of nearly 1 million Khanates, which seemed so aggressive and powerful, would still be defeated by the 5-star army. This was an army that did not play by the rules, but at the same time, they had many trump cards up their sleeves. When faced with such an opponent, it was often impossible to guard against them. It was only natural that they would lose in the end. Your Majesty, our rations can only last for another 10 days at most. We don't have much water left. If this goes on, we... Finally, one of the generals asked Jawaharlal Nehru in a doubtful tone. Kill those who incite the army's morale. Nehru did not even look at the general. He just waved his hand. Immediately, the palace guards rushed forward and beheaded the person who spoke. When the other ministers and generals saw this scene, they all shrunk their necks. Nehru wanted to use this method to tell everyone that there was only one path for them to take, and that was to resist to the end. As for those who had other thoughts, they should all go to hell. A general died because of one wrong sentence. This made the others not dare to say anything even if they had other thoughts. They could only hope that the reinforcements would appear, or a miracle would happen, and the 5-star army would take the initiative to retreat. It was impossible to make the 5-star army retreat. Since they came with such a large force, how could they retreat without destroying the Hindustani royal family and occupying this place? As for the reinforcements? Haha. No one was a fool. The strength of the 5-star army was there for all to see. Unless one had enough confidence, who would easily get involved? What was the difference between that and taking the initiative to die? Days passed, and the fire continued to burn fiercely. Every day, the Air Force would come to Bidar city. Regarding this, the Hindustanis in the city went from being terrified at the beginning to being indifferent towards the end. They were used to it. But if one looked carefully, one would see that whether it was the soldiers or the civilians, all of them had a look of despair on their faces. Obviously, they were all prepared to die. They could not see any hope of survival. Ordinary soldiers and civilians would accept their fate. Or rather, their lives were cheap to begin with. If they died, then so be it. But the ministers, nobles, and generals in the city did not want to die. They had families. Some of them had wives and many children. How could they be willing to die just like that? Under the strong pressure, King Neru's authority was no longer an existence that could suppress everything in their eyes. It was no longer an existence that made them tremble in fear. This was especially so for some of the more knowledgeable officials. The news that they received was that whenever the five-star army conquered a country, they would not kill anyone for no reason. On the contrary, those who surrendered and submitted to the Han people could still live with a tenth of their wealth. They just needed to move to another country. When this news was spread by the secret agents of the intelligence department in the city, and the nobles and people in power knew about it, some people were finally moved. Seeing that if they continued to resist, they would only die. They were unwilling and decided to save themselves. The so-called saving themselves referred to surrendering to the five-star army and seeking a way out for themselves. If they wanted to do this, they had to overthrow the mountain in front of them, King Neru. Maybe the strength of a minister was limited, and the strength of a general was far from enough. But when everyone joined forces, their strength became very shocking. Under the silent collusion, more than 90% of the people in power had been united. In 1466 AD, in the 6th month, when Neru was still sleeping, his subordinates rebelled and fought with his guards. In the end, Neru personally went up and was killed in a chaotic battle. Along with King Neru being killed, the generals and ministers who took over opened the city gates of Bidar and India surrendered. In the same month, Yang Chendong personally gave the order to establish the India province. The governor was the former 1st Cavalry Army 5th Division Commander Gong Feng. Considering that only the royal family of India was destroyed, there were many cities and armies that had not surrendered. As such, the Second Army was established. The commander was appointed by Governor Gong Feng, and the former Second Army Myo Duo was under him. Gong Feng was appointed and quickly promoted. Apart from the fact that this person was indeed capable, as he was an all-rounder, which made Yang Chendong feel assured. Another important reason was that other senior officers were not willing to take on this position. For example, Tian Hu, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Army, was used to fighting and killing, especially the feeling of fighting with Yang Chendong. Letting him become the commander of the army seemed to be a promotion, but because of this, he was fixed in one place. This was something he was unwilling to do. There was also Wu Sheng, the commander of the 3rd Army, who also had this qualification. But a few years ago, he was thrown in Eastern Europe for 10 years. Those days were really hard. Facts also proved that he was a tiger general, not a good minister who ruled the country. There was no need to consider it. Finally, a new commander of the 3rd Army, like Su He, had enough experience and was brave enough to fight in the war. These years of military merit had already allowed him to join the Han nationality and become one of their own. But he was just a martial artist. He did not know many big words. Counting on him to revitalize and build a place, then forget it. In the end, it was Gong Feng's turn. Although this person did not even have the experience of being a commander, he was now directly appointed as the commander of the army. The promotion was a bit too fast. But don't forget, he was Yang Chendong's student. Whether it was loyalty or ability, he was a top-notch person. Since he had such an advantage, no one could say anything if he was promoted faster. Therefore, this heavy responsibility fell on Gong Feng's head. After receiving the appointment, he knelt in front of Yang Chendong with tears in his eyes. While thanking Yang Chendong for his kindness, he also said that he would do his best to pacify the whole of India, and then seize the time to build and strive for self-sufficiency as soon as possible. He would do his part to strengthen Yang Chendong. At the end of June 1466 AD, King Wunan of Daimyang Yang Chendong led the main army out of India and went straight to the city of Lahore in the north. Chapter 1551. Sultanate, Delhi. When the news of the Indian King Neru's men being killed and the five-star army occupying the heavily defended city of Bidar without sacrificing a single soldier reached Delhi, King Lodi was truly terrified. The way he saw it, even if the Indian army was no match for the five-star division, they would at least be able to hold on for a few years. That way, he would have sufficient time to make preparations. Whether it was recruiting a new army, expressing goodwill to the Han people, or even choosing a place to escape, there would be a path he could take. Who would have thought that the seemingly strong Indian army would be so weak that they would be completely wiped out in just over half a year? Even King Nehru himself couldn't protect himself and was killed by his subordinates. With this lesson in mind, Rodi was extremely fearful of the 5-star army. He was even more afraid that he would be betrayed by his subordinates and be beheaded when the enemy's soldiers arrived at the city gates. After careful consideration, he handed over the letter of surrender before the 5-star army could attack him. He was willing to hand over the entire Delhi Sultanate to King Wunan of Daimyong. He only asked for a place to spend his remaining years in peace and for the other party to spare his army and people. By the time Yang Chendong arrived at Lahore after spending nearly 2 months, the Sultan's letter of surrender had also arrived. Yang Chendong, of course, accepted it with a smile. He then led his army straight into the Sultanate and entered the capital of Delhi. Outside the city gates of Delhi, Rodi changed out of his royal robes and wore the plain clothes of a commoner. He knelt in front of the city gates and handed over the king's seal and the tiger-moving seal to Yang Chendong in front of all the officials and commoners. He stayed in Delhi for 5 days and comforted Rodi. He also said that he would send him to Chichen city, where the weather was pleasant and the living facilities were good. It was the best place to spend his remaining years in peace. After that, he met with some of the officials in the country and won over many of their hearts. In the 9th month of 1466, he led the main force of the army out of Delhi, passed through Kanauj, Jabuna River, and arrived at the border city of Benares. His army then arrived at the border city of Sadpur in the Barangi kingdom. At this time, the nobles of Bangra were also panicking. India was destroyed and the Delhi Sultanate surrendered. The situation had changed so quickly that it was beyond their expectations. If it was half a year ago, who would have thought that the 5-star army would be so powerful that even the barriers behind them, India and the Delhi Sultanate, which they thought were the safest, had been taken down one by one? Now, Bangla, who was originally at the rear, had become the front line. They had to face the 5-star army head-on. Did they have the ability to do so? Before the main force of the 5-star army could do anything to Sadpur city, 2 different voices were heard in Dhaka city. One wanted to surrender, while the other wanted to fight. Most of them were descending. It was clear that Bangla, with a population of less than 3 million and an area much smaller than India, was truly afraid. They might be able to take advantage of the fact that the 5-star army was not paying attention to them to take advantage of them. However, when the 5-star army treated them like a piece of cake and wanted to deal with them, their fear would appear in their bones. As the king, Abdul's power was not completely centralized. The power he inherited from his father, Mar-ad-Din, was not complete. There were even some voices in the country that looked down on him. Him sending troops to Myanmar was also a means to divert everyone's attention. He hoped to use this opportunity to win a few battles to lay his foundation and let everyone know that he was not inferior to his father. On the contrary, he was even stronger. His train of thought was correct. Usually, a new king would use some external methods to settle internal matters and achieve the goal of centralizing power. However, the bad thing was that they should not have chosen the 5-star army as their opponent. Now that they had attracted the attention of this lion, even Abdul was afraid. After learning that the Sultanate had surrendered, Abdul immediately wrote a letter to General Rajiv, who was fighting in Burma. He explained the situation at the rear and asked him to ask for help from the great Ming Dynasty's 3rd provincial king, Zhu Huiyun. No matter what, he had to help him. Otherwise, with Bangla's strength, he would not be a match for the 5-star army, who had the strongest firearms. Unfortunately, after writing the letter, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no reply. It was not that Rajiv did not inform Zhu Huiying. Instead, it was that Zhu Huiying could not even protect himself. How could he have the strength to support Bangla? Previously, the matter of the 2 sides working together to divide the young faction's territory seemed like a joke now. Perhaps Abdul trusted Zhu Huiying too much and fell for his trap. He attracted such a powerful enemy like the 5-star army. It could be imagined that since they were the ones who made the first move, it was time for them to return the favor with a kick. It was just that Yang Xie's territory was big, and his strength was strong. He could take a few kicks like nothing happened, but Bangla was too small. How could they withstand a kick from the 5-star army? Tell Zhu Huiyun that if he doesn't send reinforcements, I will also surrender to the 5-star army like the Sultan. At that time, I will also tell King Wu Nan of the Great Ming Dynasty about his previous promise. He can just wait to be burned by the flames of anger. Abdul, who was furious, said sternly to the newly sent messenger. He just wanted to put on a threatening appearance. If he did not do so, he was afraid that Zhu Huiying would not help him with all his strength. But what Abdul did not expect was that this threat would cause him to lose his life in the end. On the 7th day after he sent out the new emissary, a group of relatively short and serious people came from outside the palace of Bangra. When they appeared at the back door of the palace, they were welcomed in. The palace that was usually tightly guarded was now like an open park in front of these people. There were no secrets to be kept. That night, it was these people who changed into night clothes and quietly appeared outside King Abdul's palace. In the night, these people moved like lightning and were as swift as the wind. The 20 palace guards waiting outside were not even a match for these people in black. In less than half an incense's time, they were all killed. When the leader of the black-clothed people appeared beside the king's bed, Abdul seemed to have sensed something and slowly opened his eyes. "Who are you? Who are you?" When he opened his eyes, he saw a black figure standing in front of him. Out of instinct, Abdul could not help but exclaim. But after that, he felt a chill on his neck. It was as if something was flowing out of his body. Then, all the strength in his body began to be sucked away, bit by bit. Abdul was dead. He died on his bed. Along with the queen, her personal maids, and dozens of guards. The king died from an assassination. It was only in the middle of the night when another shift of guards came to take over the shift. Once this was out, the already anxious people of Dhaka city became even more chaotic. In the middle of the night, the entire palace was brightly lit. Many people were shouting to catch the assassins. But obviously, they did not even know the exact time of the king's death. How could they catch the assassins? And in less than an hour, a group of black figures left the palace. When they left, the leader of the black-clothed people stopped in his tracks. His eyes revealed a cruel and smug smile. Under the moonlight, one could see a pair of small triangular eyes. If Yang Chendong was here, he would definitely recognize him. He was one of the special ninjas of the Japanese Empire who was on his death list. Sadpur City. When Yang Chendong led the 5-star army to the city, the general guarding the city sent out a messenger. The general idea was that the king intended to surrender, but what should he do? He still needed to discuss with the ministers, so he needed some time. He hoped that the 5-star army could wait for a few days. Facing the messenger, Yang Chendong did not feel anything wrong. India was destroyed just like that. The king of India died because of it. Then, the king of Delhi Sultanate surrendered. Now, it was Bangla's turn. It was reasonable for them to choose to surrender. Yang Chendong could understand the situation. He told the messenger that he could wait for a few days. He didn't even threaten the other party to not play any tricks. Facing the 5-star army, who had absolute strength, delaying the battle for a few days wouldn't have any effect. So he wasn't worried that the other party would play such tricks. It should be that Abdul really needed time to discuss with the ministers. After all, the surrender of a country was not a small matter for a country. While waiting, 7 days passed. Sadpur city's defense became even tighter. There were also many soldiers on the city tower. Although they knew that their arrows couldn't hit the 5-star army's camp 5 miles away from the city, the soldiers still drew their bows and put on an attitude of, "If you dare to come, I dare to shoot." The situation suddenly became tense. This naturally didn't escape the eyes of the scouts. When the situation was reported back to Yang Chendong, he was also confused. He couldn't understand why Bangla's soldiers suddenly became tough. Could it be that they have something to rely on? This doubt was quickly solved. Just like the intelligence personnel in India, the intelligence personnel in the small country of Bangla also didn't enjoy the treatment of having a radio station. So they used people to transmit the news, which made the news less effective. But in the end, the result was still in front of Yang Chendong. Abdul was assassinated. The king of a country was assassinated. It was no wonder that the soldiers of Bangla were so nervous. Who did it? After seeing this news, Yang Chendong's always confident eyes flashed with ruthlessness. Chapter 1552. The assassination order was definitely not given by him, and without his order, no one would dare to do it. Moreover, to assassinate the king of a country in a heavily guarded palace without being discovered afterwards was not something an ordinary person could do. Even in the entire Xianxia, even the spies of the intelligence department's action team couldn't do it. Only people like the Wolf Fang Special Forces, who had been specially trained in beheading operations, could do it. Of course, the high-level ninjas of the Japanese Empire could also do this if they had an insider. In Yang Chendong's eyes, without his order, these two armies wouldn't dare to act without orders. Then who could be the murderer? What good would killing King Abdul do to the person who did it? Yang Chendong, who was puzzled, was really puzzled. This sudden incident was not as simple as the killing of a king. At least, it showed that there was a dark hand behind the scenes that he couldn't see or didn't know about. Since they had the ability to kill King Abdul, then could they also pose a threat to his safety? Of course, Yang Chendong was now at the level of a grandmaster, and he had Okura's protection. Unless someone could kill him in an instant, there would be no chance. But this didn't mean that his family would be safe. Beta Persei immediately sent a report to Jianghu and asked him to increase the security level of the Resin City Palace. Although he didn't think of the reason, it was necessary to take precautions. Understood. Beta Persei also thought of something, and his expression changed drastically. Then he turned and went to the telegraph office. Yang Chendong was left alone in the tent, and he was silent for a long time. With Okura's help, there was really no one in the world that could make him feel afraid. If there was one, it would be the people in the dark. Because such a person, you don't know who they are, what kind of means they will use, and what kind of method they will appear in front of you. If he made a mistake and fell into the other party's trap, he would have to pay a heavy price. This was especially true for his family and children in the palace. If any of them were hurt, Yang Chendong would not be able to accept it psychologically. In his previous life, he was an orphan. Other than the military and he had no other relatives. But in this life, he had these family members, so as a man, he had to protect them well. Anyone who wanted to harm them would have to go through him first. Otherwise, if they suffered any losses, even if he found the culprit and tore him into pieces, it would be too late for regrets. It would not be enough to make up for everything. Who? Yang Chendong, who had been sitting for a long time, slowly stood up. He had already decided to let Yang Sen investigate this matter personally. At the same time, he had also arranged for the members of the Langia Special Forces to be hidden outside the palace of Resin City as an extra layer of insurance. At this moment, he suddenly felt like there was a dagger at his back. But no matter what kind of feelings he had, the problem of Bangla still had to be solved. Their king, Abdul, was assassinated. Presumably, everyone would think that he was the culprit. If that was the case, it would be impossible to reclaim this place peacefully. After all, how could the five-star army, which even their king could not tolerate, gain the trust of Bangla's officials and generals? Since peaceful means could not solve the problem, then they would fight. Fight until the opponent was afraid, until the opponent surrendered, until Bangla was destroyed. They were the ones who attacked Yangtze's Myanmar province first. Now, it was time for them to pay the price. If they were not convinced, then they would fight until they were convinced. If they did not surrender, then they would fight until they surrendered. The death of King Abdul could not stop the advance of the five-star army. Early the next morning, the 2nd and 4th divisions of the Cold Front Division were fully armed and arrived at the outskirts of Sadpur city. When they were 3 miles away, the cannons roared and shells whizzed through the air towards the 5 city towers. After a round of cannon fire, the city walls collapsed. Using this opportunity, the 1st Cavalry Army and the new army's elite cavalry attacked from the left and right respectively. Sadpur city fell. This battle seemed to be very easy. But that was only because of the advantage of the firearms. In fact, it was not that there was no resistance at all. For example, when the 2 cavalry armies charged into the city, they encountered a lot of resistance. Especially after entering the city, there would be people shooting arrows from the dark corners from time to time. Because of this, both cavalry armies suffered casualties, especially the new army. Just after entering the city, the number of soldiers killed and injured exceeded 2,000. For the new army, this was already a defeat. Such a large number of casualties made them too ashamed to face anyone, let alone report the losses to Yang Chendong. But how could Yang Chendong, who always had full control of the army, not know? After listening to Beta Persei's report, he only replied with a cold expression, understood. Although it seemed like there was nothing else to say, in the following siege battle, the artillery fire of the Cold Front Division became even fiercer. Not only that, the Air Force was also used. Fire burned the various cities belonging to Bangra. It was as if wherever the army went, there would be wails, corpses, and scorched earth. This was Yang Chendong's revenge for the resistance of the Bangra people. Weren't you willing to shoot arrows from the back? Fine, I won't even give you the chance to do so. When are you going to blow up the city and burn it again? Only when you have no place to hide will we enter the city. Not only that, along the way, the Bangra generals who resisted the 5-star army were all skinned alive and wrapped in grass. No matter if it was a dead general or a living general, it was the same. In this battle, the 5-star army had shown their cruel side, completely changing the image of the Han people in the eyes of others. They were magnanimous and kind. Yang Chendong never showed mercy to his enemies. Yang Chendong always said to everyone that if one repaid evil with good, how would one repay good? If you are not kind, I will not be righteous. If you can do it on the 1st day, I will do it on the 15th day. In the end, let's see who is afraid. The kindness of the Han people had always been given to those who had the intention to correct their mistakes and were kind-hearted. As for those kind and black-hearted jackals, forget it. Against them, Yang Chendong had plenty of hunting rifles in his hands. Regarding Yang Chendong's decision, none of the generals in the army objected. Firstly, they were used to seeing life and death, and knew that being kind to the enemy was being cruel to oneself. They knew that if the enemy was not eliminated, it would be harmful to oneself. Secondly, this time, it was Bangra who attacked Myanmar first, so it was time to teach them a lesson. It was like when someone punched you, but because of the limited strength, the punch did not kill you. Now that it was your turn, of course, you had to use as much strength as you could. Thirdly, which was also the most important point, everyone trusted Yang Chendong. Over the years, his position and authority in the army was unchallenged. His words were like the truth, and everyone was used to obeying. With the above 3 points, Yang Chendong's orders were naturally carried out with all their might. However, just because the army did not have any objections, it did not mean that the civil officials did not have any opinions. For some reason, this matter spread to Chichen City, as well as some other provinces under Yang Xie's control. It attracted the opposition of some officials and a few scholars. In their view, the Han people were the masters of the world. Since that was the case, they should have a tolerant attitude towards their friends. Especially those who had not been enlightened, they should be more reasonable. Once they knew the etiquette, they would not go against the Han army. What's more, this time, it was April who was assassinated first. As his subjects, it was normal for them to retaliate. These rumors were also gathered by the intelligence department and reported to Yang Chendong. This made Beta Persei, who was on the side, curse on the spot. These scholars, to think that they keep talking about those who know the truth and the sage's principles. Don't they even know right from wrong? That bullshit King Abu was not killed by us at all. He was about to surrender, how could we kill him? It was obvious that someone was trying to frame him. How can these people be the accomplices of a villain? Yang Qindong agreed with Beta Persei's words. It was impossible to say that he was not angry. He was fighting and killing on the front lines, risking his life at all times to bring glory to the Han people and let them live a good life. Now, they had taken advantage of him and were still acting obedient. What magnanimity, they really did not know fear. With anger in his heart, he curiously looked at the list of names from the intelligence department. He wanted to see who was on it and who he was familiar with. Not to mention the list, he really saw a few familiar faces. For example, the Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Ethnic Affairs, Dong Chuanfu, and the Deputy Director of the Ministry of Grain, Yan Lianshui. These two people, because their positions were not low and their positions were very important, their names left some impression in Yang Qindong's heart. As for the others, he didn't care. They were just some unknown names that couldn't arouse his interest in the slightest. The list also recorded some of their opinions. The most important thing was that they were the Celestial Empire and were a country of etiquette, so they should help some small countries. How could the army do such a cruel thing? Yang Qindong only laughed coldly at this. In his eyes, these people were not real scholars. From Yang Qindong's point of view, a true scholar was not only a scholar who could write essays and recite poems, but also a person whose essays were creative and thoughtful. Moreover, they were also people who had humanistic feelings and social sciences. Moreover, real scholars were people who were the most serious, full of a sense of justice, and who cherished their own reputation the most. Jumping out like a group of jumping clowns, belittling others to elevate themselves, pretending to be virtuous, fishing for compliments, and looking down on others, such people could not be called scholars. They could only be called a group of arrogant and shameless pseudo-scholars. Chapter 1553. Thinking about it, they were quite pitiful. Because they had low self-esteem, were reclusive, and were not accepted by the world, they could only use such claptrap and lowly methods to attract the public's attention. If it was just to attract the public's attention, Yang Qindong was not willing to comment on it. He had a lot of things to do in a day, and there were also a lot of things that needed to be decided by him. He did not have the time and energy to pay attention to these people who did not have a strong sense of existence. However, they should not have attacked the military. This touched Yang Qindong's bottom line. Yang Qindong's way of ruling the country was not complicated. It could even be said that it was somewhat simple. In order to better manage the areas under his rule, he would give the civil officials great power. He only needed to divide the work. As for the more detailed work, he would let the people under him do it. He only needed to wait and see the results. If the results were good, he would continue to use them. If the results were not good, or if it proved that the person was not capable, he would just replace them. Sometimes, he would even indulge the civil officials. This was a form of respect for them, and also a strategy to manage the country. After all, the civil officials were important. As long as they were given what they needed, these people would work hard for him. This could solve many of the troubles of a monarch. He could indulge the civil officials, but there was one thing that no one could touch. Even if it was an important official or an indispensable existence in the eyes of others, it was still not allowed. This matter was related to the transfer of military authority in the army. Looking at the history of the dynasties, the reason why the founding monarchs were always at the same level was because they enjoyed the supreme ability to transfer military power. In the later years of the dynasty, due to various needs of balance, the monarchs had to give up military power and began to play all kinds of tricks with the civil officials. By doing so, it seemed that they could hold great power and know everything about the country. However, if they neglected the importance of military power, the final result was that the civil officials could control the military. Once they met a strong opponent, they would not even have the power to fight back. Moreover, a monarch who did not hold military power could not gain the respect of his subjects. After all, if he did not have any means to intimidate them, why should they be afraid of him? Yang Qindong, who understood this principle and saw through its essence, firmly grasped the military power in his hands. In this way, he had the power to change the situation at any time, hanging a sword of Damocles over the heads of the civil officials. As such, they had no choice but to obey. Not only did Yang Qindong do this, but his descendants also had to do this in the future. In this way, they would not have to worry about the collapse of the country. Even if something irreversible happened, at least they would have the ability to protect themselves. With such understanding and deep thinking, how could Yang Qindong change his decision just because of the clamor of some scholars? Since the policy had been set, it would not be easily changed. Not only that, Yang Qindong did not intend to let go of those scholars who were clamoring and picking on him. Not to mention that he was a person who would not rub sand in his eyes, but he was still able to distinguish between right and wrong. What? You're eating my salary and living in the house that I built. How dare you come back and criticize me? With Yang Qindong's authority and influence in Yangxia, they were already so presumptuous. It could be imagined that if his descendants were in this position, they would be even more rampant, right? If it was a more cowardly heir, wouldn't he be eaten by these so-called scholars? If he did not find something for these people to do and let them know that the horse lord had 3 eyes, he was afraid that such things would only happen more and more in the future. Beta Persei, send a telegram to City Lord Yu Qian and Yang Wu. Pick out the people on the list and let them form a temporary diplomatic group. Allow them to go to the camp of the king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huiyan. Also, tell them that I can do as they say without using a sword or a spear. Then, I need them to influence the king of the 3 provinces, and let them urge and force Zhu Huiyan to surrender unconditionally immediately. Otherwise, no one can guarantee what the consequences will be. Beta Persei took notes with a pen at the side, but as he wrote, he laughed out loud. This was clearly a means for the young master to deal with these scholars. It was simply impossible to make the other party surrender unconditionally. The king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huiyan, who had hundreds of thousands of soldiers, was not the kind of person who would wait for death. If he was, he would not have harmed his eldest brother and 3rd brother to seize power. However, in Beta Persei's view, this was a good thing. Who asked those scholars to criticize the army when they had nothing better to do? Did they really think that they were in the Ming Dynasty? Did they really think that they were those imperial censors who could make a rumor about anything, and even if there was an accident, they would not be blamed for it? Now, I'm asking you to negotiate with Zhu Huiyan, the person who killed his brother. If you have anything to say, you can say it to him. But remember to be careful. Don't provoke the other party and end up angering him. If that happens, even the gods won't be able to save you. When Beta Persei was trying hard to hold back his laughter, Yang Qindong spoke again. Send a telegram to Deputy City Lord Luan Shaochen. Tell him to keep an eye on this matter. If anyone on this list dares to not go, they will be stripped of their official position and will never be employed again. Their descendants will also not be able to be officials for 3 generations. Yang Qindong was worried that these people would play tricks when they saw the real move, so he came up with such a punishment system. Don't underestimate these so-called scholars who boasted of being virtuous and virtuous. Pick out one of them and put them in the future, they would all be at the level of emperors. Especially when it came to pretending to be dead, they were all top-notch experts. If they didn't set some bottom lines, they would really come up with all kinds of tricks. The telegram flew straight to Crimson City and soon appeared on the desk of the City Lord of Crimson City, Yu Qian. Not only that, but Deputy City Lord Luan Shaochen and Yang Wu of the Yang family also received the same telegram. The telegram was made public and had no intention of keeping it a secret. In just half a day, the news had spread everywhere. Dong Xuanfu, who was named in the telegram, had a gloomy expression on his face. In his office, Yan Lianshui, the deputy director of the grain department, was crying and complaining with tears and snot running down his face. Elder Dong, they clearly don't see eye to eye with us. They think we're talking too much and want to make an example out of us. As our leader, you must speak out against it. I don't want to face the king of the 3 provinces. I heard that this person even killed his brothers. He's a demon king. Yan Lianshui fully displayed his acting skills as an award-winning actor. His face was full of pitiful, and tears flowed freely from his eyes. Those who didn't know would think that he had suffered a great grievance. When he said this, Dong Xuanfu's face became even uglier. What did he mean by being the leader? He wasn't going to take the blame for this. Thus, he said coldly, Deputy Director Yen, pay attention to your status. This matter was voluntary from the beginning to the end. No one forced anyone, let alone being the leader. After this reminder, Yen Lianshui realized that he had said something wrong and quickly corrected himself. Yes, Elder Dong is right. We were willing. However, our intentions were good. We didn't want to see the 5-star army brutally kill people. There's nothing wrong with this. Now, you want us, the civil officials, to persuade the king of the 3 provinces to surrender? This is an impossible task. Perhaps we won't be able to return. Elder Dong, you are someone whose city lord you personally wrote a letter to invite. You have a lot of face, so you must report this matter truthfully. Humph, this time, Dong Xuanfu didn't say anything to refuse. He was indeed summoned by Yu Qian from the Southern Ming Dynasty. At that time, he was just an unsuccessful 7th-rank imperial censor in the Southern Ming Dynasty. He was getting older and was about to die. At this time, Yu Qian sent someone to deliver a letter to him. He thought about the current situation and saw that Bugnam of Gojoseon was going to replace the Great Ming Dynasty. Thus, he made the decision to join the Southern Ming Dynasty and become the deputy chief. In reality, it wasn't just Dong Xuanfu. In the entire Xianxia dynasty, there were many people like him. They were all invited by Yu Qian or their colleagues who had been officials in the Great Ming Dynasty. However, these people had a common characteristic. Whether it was in the Southern Ming Dynasty or in Baiming, they were the type of people who weren't used in important positions. Otherwise, they wouldn't have abandoned their families and come to the Xianxia dynasty. After all, in the eyes of many people, the Great Ming Dynasty was the orthodox. Dong Xuanfu, who was personally invited by Yu Qian, was very proud of himself. Relying on this, even the head of the Ministry of Ethnic Affairs, his immediate superior, was rarely in his eyes. Now that something had happened, he naturally had to ask Yu Qian for help. Alright, I'll go look for City Lord Yu now. All of you just stay here quietly and don't say anything that goes too far. Dong Xuanfu stood up from behind the desk and tidied up his clothes. Under Yen Lianshui's admiring gaze, he walked out of the office. The main responsibility of the Ethnic Affairs Department was to adjust the conflicts between the various ethnic groups in order to achieve harmony. In the end, they would eliminate the barriers and become one family. Just from this point alone, it was a very important department. When Yu Qian recommended Dong Xuanfu for the position of deputy minister, he had high hopes. He believed that with this person's ability, he would be able to do things well. Therefore, as someone who was valued by Yu Qian, Dong Xuanfu didn't need to make an appointment to see the city lord. When the staff of the city lord's manor saw Dong Xuanfu appear, they first greeted him with a smile. Then, with the excuse that the city lord was still busy and needed to wait for a while, they invited him to a nearby lounge. Dong Xuanfu didn't think too much at first, but after staying for more than 2 hours, his expression became a bit ugly. In particular, he hadn't seen anyone pour tea for him in such a long time. How could he not know that he was being ignored? Chapter 1554. Thinking about it, he was just called by Yang Chendong. Although on the surface it was said that he was entrusted with an important task, anyone with a clear mind could see that there was clearly a problem. At this time, who wouldn't stay away from him? How could anyone take the initiative to approach him? This was the official scene. When he was proud, he was surrounded by flowers. When he was frustrated, he was surrounded by holes. Sigh. After a sigh, Dong Xuanfu knew that his situation was a bit dangerous, but the more it was like this, the more he had to find Yu Qian and argue with him. Otherwise, he would really be finished. He got up, strode out of the lounge, and went straight to the floor of the city lord mansion. During this period, although there were staff members stopping him, he really ignored them until he pushed the door upstairs. He didn't even knock on the door, which was enough to show the anger in Dong Chuanfu's heart now. When he pushed the door in, he saw Yu Qian wearing a pair of reading glasses and looking down at something. When the two looked at each other, Yu Qian showed a puzzled look. "Yinghai, why are you here?" Yinghai was Dong Chuanfu's name. Usually, only familiar people would call him like this. When Dong Chuanfu saw Yu Qian's stunned expression, he knew that the people below must not have reported his arrival. Thinking that it was not that Yu Qian didn't want to see him, the anger in his heart also subsided a lot. However, the staff behind him, seeing Dong Chuanfu break into the city lord's office without any etiquette, couldn't help but show a helpless look on his face. He seemed to want to explain something to Yu Qian. These staff members of the city lord mansion had long been convinced by Yu Qian's feelings and work attitude for the country. This time, they also knew that Dong Chuanfu came to ask for help. In order to reduce some pressure on Yu Qian, they acted on their own initiative and didn't want to arrange a meeting. Who was Yu Qian? His brain was very flexible. No one said anything, just the situation in front of him. He guessed most of it. He also knew that the staff members were doing this for his own good, but since he was here, he couldn't just kick him out. He had to see him anyway, so he waved his hand and said to the staff members, "You can leave, I will have a good chat with Yinghai." The staff had no choice but to withdraw, but there were still some discerning people who went to the office of the deputy city lord, Wuxia Xianxia, on the lower floor. After the office door was closed, Yu Qian stood up and personally poured a cup of tea for Dong Chuanfu. Then, he sat down on the sofa in the reception area. "Yinghai, you already know?" In public. Dong Chuanfu raised his head and wanted to say something. However, Yu Qian waved his hand and said, "Yinghai, you were too reckless this time. You don't know what happened at all. You just listened and believed some things that you shouldn't have said. Now that the king is angry, the consequences are very serious." Since Yu Qian had spoken such serious words, Dong Chuanfu's face immediately fell. He just wanted to make his presence known and increase his fame and influence. One had to know that he had often used this method in the Great Ming and Southern Ming dynasty. Usually, you would only be promoted if you had enough influence. Then, you would have a smooth career path. However, he never expected that the same method would lead to such a disaster in Xianxia. It would be a lie to say that Dong Chuanfu didn't regret it. Therefore, he opened his mouth and said, in public, "I know my mistake. Please save me." Sigh. Yu Qian, who had always taken good care of his colleagues, shook his head helplessly. This time, when such a thing happened, Yang Chendong didn't send a telegram to the city lord's residence to deal with it. Instead, he directly explained the way to deal with it. Moreover, he also informed Yang Wu and Luan Shaochen. This made it impossible for him, the city lord, to say anything. Who was Yang Wu? He was one of the 5 generals of the Yang family. The entire Bugnam of Gojoseon Palace's security was in his hands. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that when Yang Chendong wasn't in Qiqian City, all the people who were loyal to Yang Xia had to listen to him. Sometimes, his words were even more effective than the city lord's residence. Who was Luan Shaochen? He wasn't just Yang Chendong's brother-in-law. He was also a 2-time provincial governor and had more than 10 years of experience in governing a place. His ability wasn't inferior to Yu Qian's. If it wasn't for the fact that he was still young and didn't have enough experience, he might even be able to replace Yu Qian's position as the city lord. Even so, Luan Shaochen was seen as the most popular candidate to succeed Yu Qian. Once Yu Qian was old and had to retire, it would be time for this person to take over. It was to the point that some of the young staff in the city lord's residence looked to him as their leader. With the help of these 2 people, Yu Qian didn't have much room to maneuver. In addition, he was also leaning towards Yang Chendong's decision. What happened at the front, most people at the back only had a rough idea. However, for someone with a high position like him, he naturally knew a lot more details. Someone killed King Abdul of Bangla and framed the 5-star army for it. In the following battle, the entire country retaliated, which caused Yang Chendong to be angry. He also didn't want his soldiers to be hurt by hidden arrows, which was why he carried out such a cruel massacre. In the end, this was a military strategy. Everyone wanted to obtain the most benefits with the least losses. It wasn't clear who was right or wrong. But now, someone actually went to command the 5-star army and blamed Yang Chendong. And the person who blamed was Yang Xie's subordinate. It would be strange if Bugnam of Gojoseon wasn't angry. Since he knew the cause and effect of this matter, whether it was for public or private reasons, Yu Qian wouldn't stop this matter. If the person involved wasn't Dong Chuanfu, who he had worked hard to win over from the Southern Ming Empire, he wouldn't even care about this. Even if he did care, with Yu Qian's personality, he would just tell the truth and do the work of the other party. As for personal reasons, he didn't even want to think about it. Yu Qian wasn't that kind of person. In history, if he was willing to go along with other people, his family wouldn't be unable to even afford a coffin after his death. He even needed to take care of the embroidered uniform guards in the future. Inghai, no one can help you with this matter. You have to think of a way to save yourself and complete the mission the king gave you. Yu Qian thought about it and felt that this was the only way. When he heard that he had to complete the mission and meet the king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huitong, he was afraid that it would be disastrous. Immediately, Dong Chuanfu said with a sad face, "In public, this is a 90% chance of death." Even if it's a 90% chance of death, so what? You still have to go. Yu Qian's face suddenly became serious as he spoke with a firm voice. In history, this person didn't take personal life and death seriously. When the Great Ming's wooden fortress was defeated and Yesen of Walla led his troops, everyone was in a panic. Some people even thought about moving the capital to Nanjing. Only he stood up without hesitation. In the end, he was the one who turned the tide. How could such a person be afraid of death? As long as he thought that something was worth doing, even if he was in the vortex of death, he wouldn't frown. After being refuted by Yu Qian, Dong Chuanfu knew that he had no other choice. He couldn't not go. If he didn't go, he would be removed from his position. Not only that, his descendants wouldn't be allowed to become officials for 3 generations. In that case, the entire Dong family would be harmed by him. He didn't want to be the sinner of the family. Then I'll go. Dong Chuanfu sighed in his heart and finally made a decision. Go. At worst, he would die. If that was the case, he believed that with this merit, his descendants would also be touched by the glory. He could be considered to have done his last bit for the family. Yu Gong, it's hard to predict whether this trip will be good or bad. If something happens, I'll have to trouble Yu Gong to take care of my family. You can rest assured that after you leave, your family won't be bullied by anyone. Besides, with our Yang Xie's current ability, the 3 provincial kings won't dare to do anything to you unless they don't want to live. At the end of his words, Yu Qian's voice involuntarily rose a lot. This was his biggest gain after following Yang Chendong for so many years. That was, he could speak with confidence and was no longer afraid of being attacked by others. Because they didn't find trouble with others, it was already fortunate. On the first floor, someone had already reported to Luan Shaochen that Dong Chuanfu had appeared and went to find Yu Qian. In this regard, Luan Shaochen just smiled and said that he understood. Then he went to do what he needed to do. Although he hadn't been in the city lord's mansion for too long, he still understood Yu Qian. This was not a person who was biased. This was something that Yang Chendong said in a very serious tone. Since it was Yang Chendong who said it, Luan Shaochen naturally didn't have any doubts. Luan Shaochen believed that City Lord Yu Qian would be able to handle this matter well. The facts also proved that Dong Chuanfu left not long after and returned home. He ordered people to pack his luggage, as if he was going to go on a long journey to the place of the 3 provincial kings. Yang Chendong didn't pay too much attention to what happened in Crimson City. He left the matter to Yu Qian, Yang Wu, and Luan Shaochen. If it wasn't done well, then wouldn't it mean that the Yang Xie had no one to use? Not paying attention to Crimson City, his eyes were more focused on the Bangla Kingdom. After showing a strong attitude and putting it into action, the so-called revenge for the king became quieter and quieter. No one wasn't afraid of death, especially this King Abdul who didn't treat his people well. After resisting for a few days and paying a huge price, they finally became obedient. When the main force of the five-star army appeared in front of some cities, even more people chose to surrender for their own safety. Faced with the Bangla army that suddenly became docile, the five-star army naturally didn't start a brutal massacre. They acted as if those who surrendered could live and everyone would be fine. As a result, their progress became even faster. In the 12th month of 1466 AD, they arrived at the capital of Bangla, Dhaka city. Here, General Caldel presented his letter of surrender. From then on, this place became one of the territories under Xianxia's control. Chapter 1555. In the palace of Dhaka city, Yang Chendong admired the scenery under the guidance of General Caldel. In the great hall of the palace, Yang Chendong sat high up on the throne and listened to the surrendered general talk about the current situation in Bangra. Ever since King Abdul was assassinated, the situation in the country had been chaotic beyond control. Various factions had emerged. Among them were the Avengers, the Warmongers, those who wanted peace, and those who only cared about themselves. Before this, the five-star army had come with fury and forced the Vengeance faction and the War faction to abandon their weapons and armor. Now, they were either dead, injured, or fleeing. They could no longer pose a threat. Otherwise, Caldel, the general of the Peace faction, wouldn't have submitted his letter of surrender. However, the Warmongers still existed and they were all generals with military power. For example, Rajiv, who was still causing trouble in Burma, was a representative of this group. According to Caldel, other than Rajiv, Azad and General Hark each led 10,000 soldiers into Burma from Bangra. They would probably cause some damage. Yang Chendong looked at Caldel's lowered head in self-reproach. He didn't intend to scold him. This had nothing to do with him. It was already a great deed for him to represent Dhaka in surrendering to the five-star army and averting the disaster of war. Very good, General Caldel. You still have some military power in your hands, don't you? Yang Chendong thought about how he would have to face the Bangra army and the three provinces' royal armies, who were provoking him. There would probably be a lot of killing. The security behind him would become even more important. Reporting to King Wunan of Damyang. The guilty general still has 20,000 soldiers. However, they are all foot soldiers and no cavalry. Their combat ability is average. Caldel spoke the truth without any exaggeration. Seeing Caldel's sincerity, Yang Chendong smiled and nodded. 20,000 people, not a small number. This way, you can continue to retain your position as a general. This prince will also leave you with an army to cooperate with you in defending Bangla from the flames of war. Sigh, this place shouldn't be called Bangla. Aren't there a lot of Bengalis here? Let's change the name to Bengal in the future. Are you willing? Originally, he thought that since he was a surrendered general, he would be lucky to be able to keep his life and a small portion of his wealth. Who would have thought that Yang Chendong would trust him so much that he would not deprive him of his military power and even let him guard this place? He was so moved that he immediately knelt on the ground and said, "Thank you Bugnam of Gojosian for your kindness. Thank you Bugnam of Gojosian for your kindness. There's no need to thank me. Just do your job well. Also, you won't be able to stay here permanently in the future. According to Yang Xie's rules, everyone here will have to move out. During this time, you will have to do the statistics, pacify the people, and do the related propaganda work. Where is the commander of the Mabe division, Na Ri Song? Your subordinate is here." Senior Colonel Na Ri Song, who had been standing in the hall, stepped out of the formation. Na Ri Song had originally been the deputy commander of the Mabe division. However, after leaving the Mabe region and fighting with the army, he was finally promoted to commander. But in reality, he should be the commander of the 2nd Division of the Mabe division because the real commander, Xin Honghai, was still in the Mabe region. Commander Na Ri, I now officially appoint you as the commander of the 2nd Division of the Mabe division. I will leave the matters here to you. General Caldel will cooperate with you. What this prince needs is for the public security here to be restored in the shortest time possible. Are there any problems? Yang Qindong smiled as he looked at the old man who had followed him for many years. Your subordinate will not disappoint the sixth young master, Na Ri Song said in a clear voice. This was truly his first time leading an army alone. Before, he had been following the main forces of the 5-star army. Even though he had military merits, it was not as satisfying as leading an army by himself. Now that he had the chance, he would definitely perform well. At the beginning of 1467 AD, when the new year began, Yang Qindong led the main forces of the 5-star army out of Bengal and headed straight for the neighboring Burma province. At this time in Burma, the so-called invading Gera army had already retreated from the territory of the 3 provincial kings of the southern Ming when they heard that the main forces were coming. They didn't even have the courage to face them and retreated thousands of miles away. In February, Yang Qindong's main forces met up with the Burmese, Laotian, and Vietnamese local armies that had been guarding this place for a long time. Yang Qindong saw Bu Hai, the commander of the 7th Division of the Leng Fong Division. Although the other side only had 2,000 people, the 2,000 Leng Fong Firearms Division soldiers had become the main force. If it wasn't for their existence, the Burmese provincial capital would be in even more danger. Yang Qindong praised these people for their tit-for-tat with the Gera army. He said in public that no matter who it was, if they dared to have ideas about Yangxia, then they would fight back. Not only that, they would also occupy their homeland. At the same time, he announced that the former Gera, now Bangladesh, had become another province of Yangxia. The generals were naturally encouraged by Yang Qindong's fearless personality. With the arrival of Yang Qindong's main forces, the Burma War also came to an end. However, the overall war was not over. On the contrary, it was just another beginning. For example, the escaped Gera generals, Rajiv, Azad, and Hak had already escaped to the territory of the 3 provincial kings. These people were going to be punished. There was also the matter of the 3 provincial king, Zhu Huixin, who had previously sent soldiers to Yunnan province. It was time for an explanation. Several years ago, Yang Qindong had entered the Far East through the first city. Then, he had killed his way into Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and now, he had returned to Southeast Asia. In this period of time, he had occupied more than twice the territory of Yangxia, subduing and conquering dozens of small and large countries. From the current map, other than the Yusang region, which was still in battle, the other regions had all fallen into Yangxia's hands. Whether it was Baiming or Nanming, they were all like meat stuffing in a steamed bun. Dealing with the problem of Nanming and Baiming was also on the agenda. Once they were dealt with, all of Asia would belong to Yangxia. He was getting closer and closer to conquering the entire world and allowing the Han people to stand at the peak. It's time. With a light sigh, Yang Qindong led his army from Myanmar to Yunnan province. That would be the entrance to the territory of the 3 provincial kings. The 3 provincial king, Zhu Huixin, did not look well recently. Originally, Yang Qindong was caught up in the battle with the Khaganate and did not have the energy to deal with him. This should be the time for him to rise. For example, once he conquered Myanmar and Yunnan province, the 5-star army would be in a state of chaos. If Yang Qindong divided his forces, there would be a higher chance of him being defeated by the Khaganate alliance. At that time, the massive Yangxia would instantly fall apart. That would be the time for him to rise as the 3 provincial king. Putting everything else aside, just taking over the territories of Yangxia would be a huge fortune. Just thinking about this made Zhu Huixin extremely excited. This was also the main reason why he dared to send troops to deal with Yang Qindong. However, his wishful thinking was quickly disrupted. When the 5-star army destroyed the Khaganate alliance, India, and subdued the Suhi kingdom of Delhi, even the Bangra kingdom was crushed. Finally, it was time for him to face the 5-star army head-on. When he heard that Yang Qindong had already arrived at the Beijiang prefecture of Yunnan province with the main force of the 5-star army, Zhu Huixin was terrified. He immediately looked for Mo Gui, who had provided him with 5 million taels of silver, and asked him for a plan. Mo Gui had appeared when Yang Chendong was confronting the Khaganate alliance. He had also appeared with 5 million taels of silver, saying that it was a gift from his master. He also said that Bugnam of Gojoseon was now trapped in the war in the west and it was time for them to strike back. After seeing the silver taels and analyzing the situation, especially after seeing that the Gurk army had already started to attack Myanmar, Zhu Huiyu thought that the opportunity had come. He ordered his subordinate general Wang Zhanjiang to lead 150,000 troops from Liangshan into Yunnan province. He wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to obtain some benefits. The original plan was very smooth. The sudden attack of the 3 provincial armies had indeed caught the 5-star army off guard. They had taken over Liangshan, Kidai, Langzhuang, and other places. However, they had encountered some difficulties when attacking Beijiang Prefecture. Relying on his advantage in numbers, Zhu Huixin did not take it seriously. Until the sudden appearance of the Langfeng division, the battle had fallen into a stalemate. However, it was just a stalemate. According to General Wang Zhanjiang's report, they could not take down Beijiang Prefecture, but the 5-star army in the prefecture could not do anything to them either. It was clearly a situation where they were evenly matched. However, now that Yang Chendong had appeared near Beijiang Prefecture with more than 200,000 troops, they no longer had the advantage in numbers. It was obvious what would happen next. That was the main force, not the third-rate forces of the provincial armies that they had faced before. The soldiers who were qualified to follow Yang Chendong were definitely veterans who had experienced hundreds of battles and could fight against 10 people each. In such a situation, the first thing Zhu Huixin should do was to order Wang Zhanjiang to retreat. However, he still wanted to try his luck and see if the mysterious man's representative, Mo Gui, had any good suggestions. After all, he felt that the master behind this person was very capable and might be able to save him. He came to Mo Gui's courtyard with hope. As soon as he entered, he saw the man standing in front of the pond in the courtyard with his hands behind his back. Needless to say, he was Mo Gui. At this time, looking at Mo Gui's back, the early morning sun shone on him, giving him a very mysterious feeling. This was the feeling that he needed. He would not forget Uncle Ying's instructions when he came, which was to speak less and act mysterious. In short, the more mysterious, the better. Chapter 1556. In order to achieve this goal, Mo Gui had indeed spoken very little ever since he came to the territory of the 3 provincial kings. In order to keep a low profile, he would reveal some crucial information from time to time. Moreover, they were all extremely confidential information about Xianxia, some of which couldn't be bought with money. Hence, he was extremely mysterious. Mr. Mo, as soon as he saw Mo Gui's figure, Zhu Huihua somehow felt a lot more confident, and he also became much more confident when he spoke. Yes, Your Highness. Upon hearing the voice, Mo Gui turned around. He was a very ordinary-looking young man who would be forgotten very quickly if he was thrown onto the streets. Seeing that Mo Gui was bowing, Zhu Huihua hurriedly stepped forward and made a gesture of greeting. Mr. Mo, please don't stand on ceremony. Actually, I have something to ask you this time. Oh, Your Highness, you mean that Bugnam of Gojoseon has led the main army to Beijiang Prefecture, right? As usual, Mo Gui said as if he had already guessed the outcome as soon as Zhu Huihua spoke. Zhu Huihua was already used to Mo Gui's foresight. He immediately chuckled and said, "That's right, but what do you think, Mr. Mo?" "Let's talk," Mo Gui said after hesitating for a moment. Then, afraid that the other party wouldn't understand, he said with a smile, "We can't defeat them. The combat power of the 5-star army's main force is not something an ordinary army can match. However, if we can negotiate, there will be a chance." Zhu Huihua also agreed with Mo Gui's words. He knew very well what kind of soldiers he had in his hands. They were formed by some young men for the sake of earning money. Many of them had never even seen blood before. It would be impossible for such an army to defeat veterans on the battlefield, not to mention that the 5-star army also had the most powerful firearms in the world. On the battlefield, the death rate of recruits was the highest. If the battle was more difficult, the death rate could reach 60% or even higher. This meant that after a battle, 10 recruits might die or be unable to continue fighting due to injuries, leaving only about 4 people left. In the second battle, this ratio would be even lower, and they might lose 1 or 2 people. After 3 to 5 battles, it would be considered good if 1 or 2 of the initial 10 people were left. Only the soldiers who stayed behind could be considered veterans of 100 battles and be called elites. Such a ratio could be found everywhere in the 5-star army, especially in the world's first cavalry army and the new army, where more than 90% of the soldiers were elites. What kind of terrifying battle prowess would they possess? One could even imagine it with one's toes. It was normal to lose, but when he heard that there was a chance to negotiate, Zhu Huichun was a little confused. There was a negotiator sent by Yang Xia in Yunnan Manor, but he didn't have the intention to do so before, so he just threw him into the courtyard and didn't bother with him. Why do they want to negotiate now? Mo Gui shook his head when he saw Zhu Huiyun's confused expression. He walked up and whispered something into Zhu Huiyun's ear. When Mo Gui's whisper fell into Zhu Huihua's ears, he could see a clear change in the listener's expression. At that moment, his face was full of shock, as if he had seen a magnitude 10 earthquake. His shock was mixed with fear. Are you scared? This is your only chance. If you succeed, the benefits will be unimaginable. Mo Gui knew that Zhu Huihua would be shocked and hesitate. When he first heard about the plan from Uncle Ing, he didn't seem any better than Zhu Huihua. But now that he thought about it, it was a good chance to turn the tables. If they succeeded, the impact and significance would be huge. Many people would be happy to see it happen. This. After a long while, Zhu Huihua still couldn't finish his sentence. In the end, Mo Gui said, "Don't say this and that. Other than this, do you think His Highness has a better idea?" This time, His Highness sent troops to Yunnan province first, so he must have angered Bugnam of Gojoseon. Do you think you will have a good time? But this is what you want. I believe you. Zhu Huihua wanted to explain. Mo Gui didn't give him a chance to continue, or he didn't think it was necessary. Us? Your Highness, do you think Bugnam of Gojoseon will listen to you if you explain this to him? You are the king of 3 provinces. If you don't want to do something, no one can force you to do it, right? In the face of such a rhetorical question, Zhu Huili was speechless. Yes, he was the one who gave the order to send troops to Yunnan province. That was an undeniable fact. Based on that fact alone, he wouldn't have a good ending. Sigh. After a long sigh, Zhu Huichun asked, "But I don't know how many chances there will be if we do this." Hearing Zhu Huihua's question, Mo Gui finally smiled. It was enough to prove that he had thought it through and was thinking about how to execute it. Mo Gui said confidently, 100%. As long as we follow the plan, he will die. Hearing such confidence, Zhu Huitu finally gritted his teeth and said, "Since that's the case, let's take a gamble. However, if anything goes wrong, I hope that Mr. Mo will lend a hand." No problem. Seeing that Zhu Huichun had agreed, Mo Gui's face revealed a relieved expression. Perhaps his mission was about to be completed. In a small courtyard in a straight alley of Yunnan East Main Street, 18 men in Chinese tunic suits were sighing as they sat in the courtyard. They all had the same expression, full of worry and worry. They were none other than the group of civil officials who had previously questioned the 5-star army's massacre in the Delhi Sultanate. When Yang Qindong heard about this, they became ambassadors and were responsible for negotiating with the kings of the 3 provinces. They also changed into Yang Xia's formal attire, Chinese tunic suits. The leader of the group was Dong Chuanfu, the vice minister of the Ministry of Ethnic Affairs. With his rank, he could be considered a senior official. He could sit in a bright and spacious office in Rezin City and give out orders. There would naturally be people working for him. Then, he could drink hot tea take a hot bath that was prepared 24 hours a day, and talk about life. He could enjoy a decent salary and live a happy life with his family. He didn't have to care about the fights outside. But because he didn't keep his mouth shut, he ended up like this. They came to Yunnan Manor. Apart from the pleasant weather, it couldn't compare to Resin City in any way. When they first came here, they were disgusted by the fact that they had to go to the toilet. Thinking back to when they were in Crimson City, whether it was the office building or the building they lived in, there were toilets, and drains that could be used. But now, in this small courtyard, they had to go to the toilet in the same place. The weather was getting hotter and hotter. Just the smell was unbearable, not to mention the flies flying around. Although it was the same in the past, after enjoying the modern treatment in Resin City, the feeling of going back to the old life was worse than death. However, they had no choice because it was Yang Chendong's orders in the first place. Besides, he even named them. Hence, none of them could escape. Even though he knew that it would be difficult to complete the task, he still had to come. He was no longer doing it for himself, but for the sake of his entire family. Along the way, they first arrived in Yunnan province, after which they headed north. During this period, they set off from Beijiang Prefecture, which allowed them to see the true appearance of the battlefield. When they saw the corpses and blood all over the ground, as well as the stench that did not dissipate for a long time, this kind of visual experience was far from what was recorded in the books of the sages. This also made them realize how cruel war was. The slightest carelessness could cause them to lose their lives. They wanted to let them know clearly how tough it was for the 5-star army to conquer the east and west. They wanted to let them know that perhaps the 5-star army had their own reasons for doing what they did in the Delhi Sultanate. Some people said that reading 10,000 books was not as good as traveling 10,000 miles. That scene was actually happening to Dong Chuanfu and the others now. It was only when their thinking changed that they realized their mistake. When they arrived at Yunnan Prefecture, they were thrown into a small courtyard and not allowed to leave. They also realized that the task this time wasn't that easy to complete. If they didn't do it well, they might even lose their lives here. Although the 18 officials were prepared to die before coming here, they were all prepared to die. However, as long as there was a little hope of survival, who wouldn't try their best to grab it? There was a change in their mentality, and they clearly knew that it wouldn't be easy to leave. Everyone was only thinking about one thing, and that was how to complete the negotiation task given to them by Yang Chendong. As for whether they would still be talkative if they survived this time, the 18 of them would probably become very obedient even without being reminded. However, they had to negotiate first, right? Now that they couldn't even see a single person, who were they supposed to negotiate with? How were they supposed to complete the task? How were they supposed to influence their opponents? Of course, there was no such thing as influence. However, they had to see the person in question before they could talk, right? After being thrown into the courtyard for more than 10 days, everyone's temperament gradually became impatient. While they were reflecting on their mistakes, they were also cursing Zhu Huiyun, the prince of the 3 provinces, in their hearts for being disloyal, unfilial, and immoral. They could only curse in their hearts. After coming to Yunnan Prefecture from Xichen City, they finally understood what it meant to live under someone else's roof, and what it meant to act according to other people's wishes. Especially after seeing the soldiers of the 3 provinces waiting outside the courtyard. They were here to protect their safety, but in fact, weren't they monitoring their every move? If necessary, they might even kill them all. Chapter 1557. At this time, the mentality of Dong Chuanfu and the others had completely changed. They were thinking about 2 things in their hearts. One was whether they would die or not. If the 2 sides didn't come to an agreement and went to war, they would probably become the first batch of martyrs. At this time, they had completely forgotten their identity. They were here to negotiate. Rather than placing their hopes on others, they might as well work hard themselves. The second thing they thought about was the change in their mentality. The 3 provincial kings were truly crazy and wanted to kill them all. They only hoped that the 5-star army could avenge them and kill all of the 3 provincial armies. At this moment, they finally understood the actions of the 5-star army in Bangla. They even thought that the 5-star army didn't kill enough to intimidate the enemy. Otherwise, why would the 3 provincial kings look down on them? No. It should be said that they were ignoring them. Everyone knew how to talk high and mighty. Their words didn't have any substance and wouldn't resonate with others. However, if they were in the same situation, they probably wouldn't say any lies, big words, or empty words. From this, it could be seen that Yang Chendong brought these 18 people with different views on war here. The effect was already evident. As the saying goes, if you don't manage the household, you don't know the cost of firewood and rice. Presumably, if they could survive, their opinions would definitely change if there was a war in the future. It was even possible for them to become staunch supporters of war. From this point alone, Yang Chendong's arrangement was correct. In the future, if someone wanted to talk about the cruelty of war and wanted to use benevolence or universal love to talk about it, they only needed to follow the example. Presumably, those dissenting voices would be completely suppressed. Dong Xuanfu and the others spent every day trembling in fear. They didn't know what would happen in the next second. It was like when the door to the courtyard was suddenly opened and Chen Tian suddenly appeared in front of everyone. They instinctively didn't know what was going on. What did this person want to do? As the most trusted minister of the 3 provincial kings, Chen Tian could definitely be called the #1 civil official. Many times, his opinions could influence Zhu Huihua. Such a busy and important person suddenly appeared in the small courtyard. Dong Xuanfu and the others were only stunned for a moment before they came to their senses and hurriedly stood up and saluted. Logically speaking, with everyone's status, especially Dong Xuanfu, who was already the vice minister of a department, people like him had the opportunity to take charge of a region and become a provincial governor at any time. His status had already far surpassed Zhu Huihua's subordinate Chen Tian, who only had a territory of 3 provinces. However, under the eaves of others, he had no choice but to lower his head. In order to survive and complete the mission, Dong Xuanfu had to learn how to humble himself. So it's Lord Chen. Excuse me for not going out to meet you. Dong Xuanfu stood up to greet Chen Tian. Although he was happy to be able to talk to Chen Tian, on the surface, Dong Xuanfu still had an unhurried appearance. He probably knew that at this time, he was not only representing himself, but also the powerful Yang faction. Minister Dong is too polite. Hello everyone. Chen Tian smiled and greeted everyone. His face was brimming with sincerity. If they were just a group of negotiators, based on Zhu Huihua's trust, Chen Tian really did not put them in his eyes. However, at this moment, he had no choice but to put on an act. This was closely related to the mission he had accepted. Zhu Huihua had just given him a very important mission. If he wanted to complete this mission, he needed the cooperation of Dong Xuanfu and the others in front of him. Although he did not think that this mission had a chance of success, in order to gain the most trust, he decided to take a gamble and give it a try. Being able to speak eloquently was one of Chen Tian's greatest abilities. With his intention, everyone sat together and began to talk. The topic was led in the direction of the result he wanted. At first, everyone was very happy with Chen Tian's goodwill and even his humble attitude. Some people even began to suppress their pride in their hearts. See, in other people's territory, they still had to curry favor with him. Didn't this mean that Yang Xia was now so powerful that no one could be a match for him? However, as the conversation deepened, Chen Tian changed his way of speaking his thoughts and put forward his request. Everyone was speechless, and the pride that had just risen was suppressed back into the bottom of their hearts. As the leader of the 18 people, Dong Xuanfu was even more furious. He loudly rebuked, "This is simply impossible. We will never agree to this request of yours." That's right. Deputy Director Yan Lianshui, who was second only to Dong Xuanfu among the 18 people, also spoke up. If there is anything you want to discuss, you can discuss it with us. We are here on behalf of Yang Xia. There are many things that Minister Dong can make the decision on. However, I don't know why you want to see Bugnam of Gojosian. You also want Bugnam of Gojosian to personally visit Yunnan Manor. Isn't it said that a gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall? Yes, we will never agree to this. For a moment, the 18 envoys actually spoke in unison. Perhaps this was because Qiantian's request was too excessive, but how could it not be, because they all knew that they could not agree to this request, nor did they have the authority to agree to it. What kind of joke was this? Inviting Yang Qindong to enter Yunnan Manor, and not allowing him to bring more than 500 soldiers? Such excessive conditions were probably something that no one in Yangxia would agree to, right? How could they agree so easily? And even if they did agree, what would it do? Although Dong Xuanfu and the other 18 people were very afraid of death, they were more worried about the safety of their families and clansmen. If because of them, Yang Qindong was in danger and something happened to him. At that time, they were afraid that they and their families would be finished together. Not only that, but their reputations might also go down in history. That was the greatest harm to scholars. Seeing that Dong Xuanfu and the other 18 people were filled with anger, Qiantian was not angry or anxious. All of this was within his expectations. He did not expect to be able to persuade them with his glib tongue. He came here to deliver the message. Whether it would succeed or not, he did not have much hope. Everyone, don't be anxious. Since it is a negotiation, then of course it is a negotiation. To put it bluntly, we will propose conditions to each other and everyone will discuss it. Like this, as long as Bugnam of Gojosian is willing to show his sincerity and not bring more than 500 soldiers into Yunnan Manor, then we will recognize his magnanimity. Our 3 provincial kings will not only apologize to Bugnam of Gojosian for the previous misunderstanding, but also be willing to give up Guangxi, Yunnan, and Gui province. Qiantian threw out a bomb as soon as he opened his mouth. Hearing this, Dong Xuanfu and the others were stunned. Didn't this mean that as long as Yang Qindong was willing to come personally, the problem of the 3 provinces would be easily solved and this place would become one of Yangxia's forces? Wasn't this the main purpose of Dong Xuanfu and the others coming here? Taking advantage of this moment of silence, Qiantian continued to speak. Everyone, our 3 provincial kings have now shown their sincerity. Next, it is up to Bugnam of Gojosian. I think this matter should be reported and handed over to the higher-ups to make the final decision. I will wait here for your good news. Goodbye. Qiantian left. However, no one paid attention to him anymore. Everyone was obviously shocked by his words. Just by showing up, Yang Qindong could make the 3 provinces under Yangxia's control without shedding any blood. This temptation was so great that Dong Xuanfu and the others could not help but swallow their saliva. It took a while for everyone to react, but Qiantian was already nowhere to be found. Everyone's gaze fell on Dong Xuanfu. He was the head envoy, and such a big matter had to be decided by him. Although no one said anything, Dong Xuanfu could see through their eyes what they were thinking. All right, let's report this matter back and let the king make the decision himself. Of course, let's not have any expectations. Dong Xuanfu was not the only one who thought this way. Qiantian and his master, Zhu Huihua, were the same. They did not think that doing this would make Yang Qindong come. Because of this, after Qiantian walked out of the diplomatic mission's courtyard, a rumor began to take root and sprout in the 3 provinces. Have you heard? The 3 provincial kings have decided to bow to Bugnam of Gojosian for the safety of the people in our 3 provinces. They only need Bugnam of Gojosian to personally come to Yunnan Manor and give him some guarantees, and he will be willing to hand over the military power of the 3 provinces. Oh. That's a good thing. Speaking of which, there's nothing wrong with the 3 provincial kings doing this. After all, they previously attacked Yunnan province and offended Bugnam of Gojosian. Now, they are probably looking for an opportunity to explain themselves. This is a good thing. Doesn't this mean that the people of our 3 provinces do not need to go through the flames of war to become Yangxia people? I heard that the Han people in Yangxia have a very honorable status. Sigh, that's not necessarily true. Now that the three provincial kings have shown their attitude, it's still unknown whether Bugnam of Gojoseon will agree. Have you forgotten? Previously, someone said that the five-star army first assassinated their king in Bangra, then used cruel methods to burn and kill many cities and people. This was all because Bangra had previously contributed to Xianxia's Myanmar province. It just so happens that the three provincial kings also attacked Yunnan province. Will they use the same methods on the three provinces under our feet? These words immediately attracted the attention of others. Someone immediately said, that's not very likely. Bugnam of Gojoseon has deep feelings for the Han people. Bangra is a foreign race. How could they use such methods on us? Chapter 1558. That might not be the case. Who can guess what the people in power want to do? As for the fact that the three provinces are all Han, that's true. However, there are so many Han in the world. Even if we die, the other Han will still be around. In a few years, the population will continue to increase, so it doesn't matter if the three provinces have us or not. Phew. Doesn't that mean that if Bugnam of Gojoseon doesn't agree to come to Yunnan Manor and accept the allegiance of the three provincial kings, then there will be a huge war, and everyone will be in danger? You're smart, brother. That's the truth, so let's pray that Bugnam of Gojoseon will agree. If he doesn't, then it means that he wants to kill us. I will join the army and fight against the five-star army. No matter how much they have done for the rise of the Han, if they want to kill me and my family, then they are my enemies. I will hand over the 100 jin and fight them to the death. That's right, that's what I think too. I will also mobilize my family to fight them to the end. Similar conversations continued and continued to spread. After Chen Tian received Zhu Huiying's order to deliberately spread these rumors, the news quickly swept across the three provinces like a gust of wind. More and more people came to know about it, and various theories and voices emerged one after another. However, from the beginning to the end, none of these conversations mentioned Zhu Huiying's request for Yang Chendong to not bring more than 500 men with him. The people were being deceived, but no one mentioned it. It was a trap in itself. This was also why Mo Gue gave Zhu Huiying the idea. It would be best if the matter was successful. When Yang Chendong brought 500 soldiers into Yunnan Manor, he would be a fish on the chopping board. However, once something happened to Yang Chendong, Yang Xia would be in chaos. At that time, who would have the time to cause trouble for Zhu Huiying? Not only that, it would also be a good opportunity for Zhu Huihua to show off his might and quickly encroach on Yang Xia's territory. If he failed, Zhu Huihua would not lose anything. On the contrary, he would have many more soldiers in his hands, and he would have more power to fight against the five-star army. Success or failure was a good thing for him. This was also why Zhu Huichun listened to Mo Gui's advice after some hesitation. Although by doing so, he would inevitably offend Yang Chendong, but even if he did not do this, how good would the result be? The rumors were still spreading. Dong Chuanfu and the others in the small courtyard were completely unaware of this. After a discussion, the 18 of them wrote a report and sent it to the telegraphist accompanying them, asking him to pass the news to Bugnam of Gojoseon. With the power of Yang Xia's intelligence department, the news of what happened in Yunnan Manor had already reached Yang Chendong's ears. Then, the report written by the 18 people was sent to the desk. As the messenger, Beta Persei was naturally very familiar with the contents, so the moment he put down the telegram, he said tentatively, "Young master, this is clearly Zhu Huiying's evil intentions. Don't be fooled by him." Beta Persei's words were well-founded. He had been by Yang Chendong's side for many years and understood his master well. He was a master who was not afraid of anything and loved to take risks. If this happened to other masters, Beta Persei would not be worried at all, because no one would take such a risk. However, it was completely different when it came to Yang Chendong. He really had the courage to do something unimaginable. If it was the Yang Xia of the past, with a weak foundation, small territory, and small population, it would be worth taking a risk. However, Xianxia had already grown into a towering tree. He was even stronger than the Northern Ming Empire and the Southern Ming Empire. Hence, such a risk had completely lost its meaning. Yes, I know, Yang Chendong smiled and looked at Beta Persei, knowing that this person was saying this for his own good. However, how could he not know that Zhu Huiying was taking a risk? If he went, he might stay there forever and even face the risk of being killed. If he did not go, the Han people of the 3 provinces would inevitably fail and become enemies with him. In this way, regardless of the outcome, the Han people would die. In this way, no matter what, it would not be worth it and he would only be the loser in the end. This was indeed a difficult choice. If he wanted to break out of this situation and obtain the ruling power of the 3 provinces at the lowest price, it seemed that the only feasible way was to take the risk. However, Chen Tian's words alone were not enough. He still needed to continue to expand the matter and use Chen Tian's mouth to make the matter a reality. Yang Chendong stood there for a long time without saying a word. Slowly, a plan began to take shape in his mind. In the small courtyard, less than half a day later, they received a personal call from Yang Chendong. After reading the contents of the report, Dong Chuanfu and the other 18 people, in addition to sighing in admiration of their king's boldness, also learned about what had happened outside and the rumors that Chen Tian had spread. Chen Tian is a despicable person, Yan Lianshui said angrily. That's right, he is a despicable person. However, in the face of a gentleman like our king, he can only give in. Men, tell the soldiers guarding us that we want to see Chen Tian. We have something important to tell him. At this moment, Dong Chuanfu was full of energy. After receiving Yang Chendong's personal telegram, he had more confidence when he spoke. After the soldiers guarding the courtyard heard Dong Chuanfu's request, they did not dare to delay and immediately reported it to Chen Tian. Chen Tian was also very curious about the 5-star army's decision so quickly. He led a group of soldiers back to the small courtyard and saw Dong Chuanfu and the others who had been waiting there for a long time. Duke Chen, our king has already replied. He welcomes and is gratified that the 3 provincial kings are willing to submit to our Xianxia. As for the 3 provincial kings' request to meet my great king in the city, I have also agreed. Dong Chuanfu's voice was not soft. He looked completely different from when they met in the morning. He looked much more energetic. He actually agreed? Chen Tian, who was originally a little absent-minded, was stunned. He originally thought that Bugnam of Gojoseon would definitely point out that this was a conspiracy and reprimand them. As such, they only needed to prepare for the upcoming battle. Then, they would make good use of the newly won people's hearts. There was still a possibility of a battle. However, when Dong Chuanfu said that Yang Chendong had agreed, Chen Tian felt that his brain was not enough to process it. Could he really agree to this? Could it be that he did not know that this was a conspiracy? Could it be that he did not know that once Bugnam of Gojoseon came to Yunnan Manor, it would be equivalent to an eagle being locked in a cage and would not have the chance to spread its wings and soar? Could it be that he did not know that this was a dangerous journey? At this moment, countless thoughts appeared in Chen Tian's mind. He was increasingly unable to understand Yang Chendong's actions. It was not until Dong Chuanfu intentionally coughed that Chen Tian was pulled back to reality from his fantasy. Oh, but I wonder if there are any other conditions? Out of instinct, he asked. Yes, our king does have conditions. Dong Chuanfu nodded. As expected. Chen Tian's heart skipped a beat. He did not believe that Yang Chendong would jump in despite knowing the truth of the matter. He had even thought about what the other party's request would be. It must be to bring more soldiers. For example, the 500 followers would be replaced by 50,000. With the powerful combat strength of the 5-star army, if these 50,000 were all elite troops, it would be very difficult to touch him in Yunnan Manor. Chen Tian already had a judgment in his heart. He was even prepared to reject the other party's request for 50,000 people because it would threaten the safety of the 3 provincial kings. He opened his mouth and said, "But I don't know what the conditions are." "Why don't you tell me?" Chen Tian just wanted to see how Dong Chuanfu and the others would perform. He didn't agree to it, but he wanted to see how Dong Chuanfu and the others would perform. Looking at Chen Tian, Dong Chuanfu did not think too much. Instead, his voice was loud as he said righteously, "Previously, there were some rumors in the city that were unfavorable to our king. I think it must have come from your mouths, so our king cannot believe you. It's coming." Chen Tian thought in his heart. However, he did not stop him. Instead, he wanted to watch Dong Chuanfu continue his performance. He only needed to wait for the other party to finish speaking before he would completely deny it. At this time, Dong Chuanfu was still talking to himself. Who knows if the 3 provincial kings will do anything else? In order to dispel our king's concerns and to make the truth of the matter public, you only need to send out official documents to the people of the 3 provinces. Tell them that the 3 provincial kings intend to submit to our king. Everything will wait until our king enters Yunnan Manor. After ensuring his safety, the authority of the 3 provinces will be handed over. Then, Bugnam of Gojoseon will come here and take over everything. No, that's too much. Chen Tian didn't even pay attention to what Dong Chuanfu was saying and directly denied it. Then, with an angry look, he snorted coldly and said, "This is simply because Wunan King doesn't trust my king. If that's the case, is there still a need to negotiate?" Not only were Dong Chuanfu and the 17 members of the diplomatic mission stunned by Chen Tian's words, but even the personal guards behind Chen Tian were stunned. They did not understand how their master's words had anything to do with Dong Chuanfu's request. At this time, Chen Tian also felt that something was wrong. This could be seen from the faces of Dong Chuanfu and the others. Out of the corner of his eyes, he glanced at the bodyguards beside him. When he saw that they were also looking at him in surprise, he knew that this was bad. Obviously, Dong Chuanfu wasn't talking about how many soldiers he would bring into Southern Cloud Manor. He forced a smile and said, "I'm sorry, Minister Dong. I've been busy recently, so I was distracted by other things. I will have to trouble you to say it again." Chapter 1559. Although Dong Chuanfu was puzzled by Chen Tian's behavior, he did not think too much about it and repeated what he had just said. This time, Chen Tian could be said to have heard it very clearly. Because of this, he was very surprised. With just this request, Yang Chendong would bring 500 followers into Yunnan Manor? Was he not worried about his own safety? Puzzled, he repeated his question. "Just this one request?" "Yes. Just this one request, but these notices must be posted all over the streets and alleys of the 3 provinces so that all the people know about this. At that time, my king will come to Yunnan Manor and give the 3 provincial kings a chance to turn over a new leaf." Dong Chuanfu raised his head and said proudly. Look, this was their king. The so-called danger was nothing in his eyes at all. Just this boldness alone was something they could never learn. "Okay, no problem." Chen Tian agreed immediately. He just wanted to spread the news and let the people of the 3 provinces know. But what was the use of this? To threaten the people? Haha. At that time, ordinary people did not have any status. Often, when the noblemen and officials said that the country was prosperous and the people were at peace, they were referring to the scholars and the noble families because they were often with the noblemen. In the eyes of the noblemen, if these people were satisfied, then the people of the world would be satisfied. Because of this, Chen Tian really did not know the use of Yang Chendong's request. So what if the people of the 3 provinces were at his beck and call? Could these people turn the world upside down? The result of this meeting was a happy ending. After Chen Tian left, he went to see Zhu Huiyun and told him about Dong Chuanfu and the others, or rather Yang Chendong's request. The 3 provincial kings were very happy to hear it. Ha ha ha, great news, great news. As long as Yang Chendong enters Yunnan Manor, he will be the prey in our eyes. He will not be able to turn the world upside down. At that time, we will be able to use the emperor to order his vassals. No matter how big the territory and how much wealth, it will be ours. Qingong, let's go and settle this matter immediately. In order to prevent any undue delay, this matter has to be done quickly. Also, send someone to keep an eye on Yunnan Manor to prevent this Bugnam of Gojoseon from secretly sending people into the city. Yang Qingdong's strength, although Zhu Huitu didn't experience it too much, but looking at the opponents he dealt with, he knew that this person was very powerful. In order to prevent the other party from playing any tricks in the dark, he had to strengthen his control over Southern Cloud Manor, especially in terms of military force. As for public opinion, Zhu Huichen really didn't care. As long as he had money, food, and soldiers, ordinary people would have to look up to him. After getting a positive answer, Chen Tian went to work with a face full of joy. Once Zhu Huichen really became a great emperor, he would have the power to meddle with Yang Xie. His status would inevitably rise, and some of his ambitions would be realized. It was very likely that he would be remembered in history. No one cared about public opinion, but only Yang Qingdong was very clear about the importance of public opinion. Yang Qingdong had some headaches about Yunnan, Guizhou, and Guangxi. These were the ancestral lands of the Han people. It was impossible to deal with them like dealing with other forces. After taking over these places, he couldn't forcibly move them out. That would be criticized behind his back. Yang Qingdong didn't care about what they said about the foreign races, but for the Han people, their position was naturally different. If possible, of course, he would want to solve the problem here in a peaceful way. Thus, Zhu Huichen came up with this move. Although it seemed that this place was abnormally dangerous, but wasn't it an opportunity for him? If he did it well, he could righteously take over the 3 provinces, and the people here wouldn't have any resistance. In this way, the big problem would be solved. Since that was the case, why would he not agree? As for what kind of danger would there be in Yunnan Manor, Yang Qingdong, who had Datsang, really didn't care too much. If they wanted to deal with him, those people had to have the ability to do so. Of course, because of Datsang, Yang Qingdong was full of confidence, but others didn't know. After learning the details of Yang Qingdong's telegram to Dong Chuanfu, Yang Xie was in an uproar. First, it was the 2 commanders of the 2nd and 4th divisions of the Langfeng army, followed by the 1st Cavalry Army's commander Tianhu, and the new army's commander Su He. Then, a group of officials in the first city and the people in charge of the provinces and regions also sent telegrams to inquire about this matter. At the same time, they also advised their king not to be impulsive. In this regard, Yang Qingdong just smiled and accepted the concern of these people. Then, he did something that made everyone exclaim. A personally written telegram was sent to Qiqian City, establishing his eldest son, Yang Bo, as the prince and establishing his identity as the legitimate heir. On the issue of establishing the successor, there were already many people who had spoken up. After all, Yang Qingdong was different from other monarchs. He was a master who always liked to rush to the front line, and danger could be discovered at any time. It was true that Yang Bo was the eldest son, and he was also the son of Queen Hu Yan. No matter how one looked at it, he was the best choice to be the successor. However, without any instructions, anything could happen. As the saying goes, if the name is not correct, the words will not go smoothly. How could the other princes not have a chance to compete? Besides, Yang Xie was really too powerful. With such a huge monster, when Yang Qingdong was around, the people in charge would be loyal and wouldn't have any other thoughts. But what if something happened? In the face of such a huge temptation, coupled with the fact that Crimson City was quite far away from many provinces, in a place where the heavens were high and the emperor was far away, it was inevitable that the ambitions in the depths of some people's hearts would be exposed. If that was the case, it was not impossible for the Yang faction to be torn apart. However, if the successor was confirmed, then it would be completely different. At that time, when Yang Qingdong wasn't around, everyone would consciously follow the new young master. Regardless of whether they agreed in their hearts, they would have to do so on the surface. If some of them had other ideas and made other moves, Yang Bo would be able to give the order to send out troops to suppress them. Just like before, it would be justifiable. This was the importance of having a legitimate successor. It was because Yang Chendong was still very young, only in his 30s, and his health had always been very good. In addition, he had the protection of the world's most elite forces, the Black Cavalry. That's right, after some people's requests for a successor were not answered, they weren't particularly anxious. And now, Yang Chendong had taken the initiative to write down the document for Yang Bo's succession, and it did indeed let some people put down the worries in their hearts. However, when they thought about Yang Chendong's actions, they couldn't help but worry for the old master. Whether it was Yang Xia or the 5-star army, it was all because of Yang Chendong that they had everything they had now. If something were to happen to this founder, the huge Yang Xia was likely to be torn apart in an instant, just like the death of Genghis Khan in Mongolia. Even if Yang Bo could achieve temporary stability, if he wanted to continue expanding his territory, it would be impossible. For some of the officials who still wanted to see how far the Han people could go, of course, this was not what they wanted. Thus, even though the succession document was sent out everywhere, there were still many officials who sent telegrams to Yang Chendong, asking him not to take the risk and enter Yunnan Manor. Among them, City Lord Yu Qian was the leader. Yu Qian's feelings for the great Ming dynasty were unquestionable, but not many people knew that his loyalty wasn't to any dynasty, but to the Han people. Since Yang Chendong did better than the great Ming dynasty in this aspect, why wouldn't he fully support him? This could be seen from the fact that he called Yang Chendong king, and had his son become an official. He also did his best to assist him. Yu Qian thought that even if he couldn't see the day when the Han people unified the world, his son and grandson had to see it and participate in it. But now, just as the hope was getting bigger and bigger, Yang Chendong wanted to take the initiative to take the risk, so how could he let it go? If Yang Chendong hadn't sent a telegram to Yang Wu and Deputy City Lord Luan Shaochen in Crimson City to keep an eye on Yu Qian, he probably would have already boarded a ship and rushed over. Even so, Yu Qian still sent 3 telegrams a day to express his determination and also warned Yang Chendong not to take the risk. The public opinion could be fought for in the future, but he couldn't take the risk and regret it for the rest of his life. Imperial Palace of Crimson City. Yang Bo, who was already 10 years old, had already grown into a handsome young man. Ever since his father left Crimson City 6 years ago, he had not returned. In other words, Yang Bo, who was already 10 years old, had not seen his father for more than 6 years. However, this did not affect the glorious image of Yang Chendong in his heart. Putting aside everything else, in the past 6 years, Yang Chendong had restored the Far Eastern province and taken down Eastern Europe and Central Asia. He had destroyed countless countries and increased the wealth, territory, and population of the Yangtze. It wouldn't be long before news of a great victory came from the front. When the little Yang Bo heard this, he felt a sense of pride and glory. From how he saw it, this was why his father was so amazing, and he felt proud to have such a father. With his father as his role model, Yang Bo did not live a pampered life because of his status as the crown prince. On the contrary, he worked even harder than the children of other families. He studied and learned how to wield his saber, and he had done some research on firearms. As the Empress Mother, Hu Yan naturally gave her full support. Whatever Yang Bo wanted to learn, the top talents in the entire Crimson City could be his teachers, allowing him to ask any questions he wanted. With great support, Yang Bo was more opinionated than his peers, and he was also more mature. He had always thought that he had to work hard so that when his father returned to Crimson City, he would be praised by his father. He wanted to enjoy the fatherly love and praise that only children could enjoy. Chapter 1560. But now, a document had spread to every province in Yangtze. He had become a prince and the first in line to inherit the throne. After knowing what this meant from his teacher, Yang Chendong was not only unhappy, but he personally wrote a telegram and sent it to Yang Chendong. The meaning was not complicated. As a son, he missed his father. He wanted to see his father and enjoy the joy that Yang Chendong brought him when he touched his little head. As a son, he didn't want his father to take risks, because his father was his everything. As the son of a king, and a possible king in the future, he understood his father's approach. He wished his father a triumphant return and would wait for his safe return. But if things did not work out, he would take the initiative to start everything and fulfill Yang Qindong's wish to let the Han people stand at the top of the world. This telegram was respectfully sent to Yang Qindong by Beta Persei. After reading the contents of the telegram, Yang Qindong had mixed feelings. He sighed in his heart. His son had finally grown up. She couldn't help but murmur in her heart, don't worry. Your father won't be in trouble so easily. I will lead you to a higher peak. I will watch you get married and have children. I will watch the day you rule this world. Order, prepare to set off for Yunnan Manor. At this moment, Yang Qindong's face was full of high spirits. He wanted to set an example for his son. He wanted to make everything impossible possible. According to the news, the kings of the 3 provinces had already posted notices, stating that as long as King Wu Nan, Yang Qindong, was willing to condescend to the southern cloud manor, the king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huixian, would be moved by his sincerity. The 3 provinces might surrender without a fight and become part of Yang Qindong's territory. When the notice was posted, the local people were overjoyed. They had long heard about the treatment of the Han people in Yang Xie's territory. Not only did everyone have a grain field, but they were also given houses to live in. Those with skills could also work in factories to earn money. It was said that many people who went there first not only did not have enough food at home but also had meat on the table during the new year. All of this was undoubtedly a fairy-like life for the ordinary people. If it was not because they were too far away or because the village officials and officials at all levels were too strict, they would have fled and sought refuge. Now, they could become a member of Yang Xia without moving and enjoy all kinds of good policies. All of the people were naturally overjoyed and looked forward to Bugnam of Gojoseon's appearance in Yunnan Manor. Of course, most of the people did not think that Yang Qindong would be a threat once he entered the territory of the 3 provinces. From their point of view, Bugnam of Gojoseon, who could destroy the Mongolians and the surrounding foreign tribes, moved into Yunnan Manor. It was the same as returning to his own home. How could there be any danger? On the contrary, if Bugnam of Gojoseon did not come, it would mean that he did not want them and their lives would be in danger. In order to survive, they had to work hard to become the 3 provinces' army and fight against the 5-star army on the battlefield. It had to be said that Zhu Huiyu had the upper hand in public opinion this time. He was now using public opinion to threaten Yang Qindong and force him to take the risk to come to Yunnan Manor. Yang Qindong, who knew everything, could not think of a way to solve the problem, so he decided to take the risk this time. Naturally, this risk was very dangerous in the eyes of others, but in Yang Qindong's eyes, it was not a big deal. If he was forced into a corner, he could use the big warehouse. But before he was at the end of his rope, it was better not to expose his bottom line. He would not forget that from all kinds of clues, there was a pair of eyes staring at him in the dark. And before he found the traitor, it was best not to use his trump card. This was equivalent to an additional insurance. If he did not want to use the big warehouse, the 500 people who came this time must be carefully selected. Of course, Yang Heir volunteered himself and insisted on following him. Next was the 2,000 Black Cavalry, the Leng brothers, and the self-proclaimed elite warriors of the world's first cavalry army. However, there were only 500 people to follow. Even if the Black Cavalry had 2,000 people, how could there be anyone else's turn? Out of 2,000 people, only 500 could be brought. With a ratio of 4-to-1, all the Black Cavalry wanted to join. In their hearts, it was all thanks to Yang Qindong that they could have a good life and social status now. Now that their master needed them, of course, they would not shirk their responsibility. Yang Qindong handed this difficult matter to Beta Persei to handle. He believed that this young family servant would do his best to protect his safety. If that was the case, who would he bring along? He must be more nervous than himself. Beta Persei also lived up to Yang Qindong's expectations. After getting the power to choose the soldiers, he called for 2,000 Black Cavalry and held an internal martial arts competition in a small area. the first 500 people could follow. As for the others, if they did not seize the opportunity, then sorry, they could only stay here quietly. In the afternoon, 500 of the most elite black cavalry were selected. Beta Persei immediately transferred a batch of firearms to them. Then, under the worried eyes of the 5-star army generals, they went straight from Beijiang Prefecture to Yunnan Prefecture under the banner of Bugnam of Gojoseon. After Yang Qindong arrived at Beijiang Prefecture, Wang Zhangjiang, one of the 3 provincial generals outside the city, retreated with his army. He came on this trip full of confidence. The army of 150,000 looked like they were bound to invade the entire Vietnamese province. In Wang Zhangjiang's mind, he suddenly appeared in Vietnamese province and had the advantage of military strength. Even if he could not conquer the entire Vietnamese province, he could at least occupy half of it. However, he did not expect that Beijiang Prefecture alone would be able to stop him here. With the cooperation of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division, he did not gain the slightest advantage no matter how hard he tried. He also did not see any hope of attacking the city. Therefore, when Yang Qindong appeared with the main army, he turned around and fled. Wang Zhangjiang's luck was very bad. When he led his troops back to Langsun, he was heavily injured by Jianghu of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division, causing him to flee like a stray dog. On the way back, in order to make himself look less miserable, he even ordered his Kiliarchs to capture many able-bodied men from nearby villages to supplement the army. However, what he did not know was that among the able-bodied men he captured, 2,000 of them were from the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division. One by one, they disguised themselves as ordinary people and were scattered all over the place. Then, they were caught and found by the 3 provinces' army and brought back to the Southern Cloud Mansion in a grand manner. Although these 2,000 men were scattered among the various armies, they were already prepared. As long as Jianghu, as the commander, gave the order, they would immediately gather and do more things. The existence of these people was also one of the trump cards that Yang Qindong dared to enter Yunnan Prefecture. Since both sides had reached a temporary truce agreement, Yang Qindong had already set off for Yunnan Prefecture with 500 black cavalry. Naturally, they did not encounter any obstacles along the way. Moreover, the armies and officials of the 3 provincial kings would come out to greet them as a sign of friendship. This allowed Yang Qindong and his troops to get closer and closer to Yunnan Prefecture. In Yunnan Prefecture. At this moment, Zhu Huichuan's face was flushed and he was extremely excited. Previously, when he heard Mo Gui's suggestion, he did not think it was feasible. At least, if he was Yang Qindong, he would never take the risk to come to Yunnan Prefecture. Since he had a good chance of winning, why would he take the risk? However, Yang Qindong actually agreed and even appointed his eldest son, Yang Bo, as the prince. This meant that he was ready to break the hatchet and sink the boat. When Zhu Huichu thought about how long it would take for Yang Qindong to appear in front of him and even be controlled by him, then he might indirectly control the entire Yang family. His heart began to beat faster and faster, and it didn't slow down. In his excitement, he secretly mobilized the elite forces in his hands to get closer to Yunnan Prefecture. What he needed to do was to wait for Yang Qindong to enter the city and find the right opportunity to control him for his own use. In order to successfully complete this mission, he continuously mobilized the elite forces under him from the provinces and gathered outside Yunnan Prefecture. At the same time, he also sent out a large number of scouts to pay attention to the main forces of the 5-star army in the south of Langsun. Once he found out that they were acting strangely, he would use Yang Qindong as an excuse to immediately send troops to attack and take the initiative first. However, from the information he received so far, the main forces of the 5-star army were very obedient. They seemed to believe that Yang Qindong could succeed in the peace talks and did not have the slightest intention of moving to the 3 provinces. This made Zhu Huichun feel relieved, but at the same time, he cursed the stupidity of the 5-star army in his heart. 10 days later, when he learned that Yang Qindong and his 500 men were less than 3 days away from Yunnan Prefecture, Zhu Huichun called a group of his confidants to a secret room to discuss and perfect the military plan. Other than his number 1 think tank, Chen Tian, there were 4 of his generals present. They were General Meng Neng, General Wu Yingtu, General Zhang Jiang, and General Kai Wenju. Over the years, Zhu Huichun had been constantly developing and expanding his strength and had gathered a group of capable people. For example, these 4 generals were one of them. There was also General Luo Guan who guarded Yunnan, General Jiang Wuqing who guarded Guangxi, and General Bai Kuan who guarded Guangxi. In the secret room, the 6 of them met and Zhu Huichun took the lead to announce the final plan, which was how to capture Yang Qindong alive and not kill him. Of course, if Yang Qindong died, Yang Xia would fall into chaos. However, for the sake of benefits, Zhu Huichun did not want to see a chaotic Yang Xia. What he wanted was to use them for his own purposes. Even if he could not take over all of Yang Xia's territory, if he could take over a third of it, it would be a land that was much larger than the Great Ming Dynasty. You're tuning in to the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.